Morning all. We'll kick off now with Councillor O'Brien giving us the karakia. Thank you, Councillor.
Morena tātou, mahi whakatūwhara tēnei o tātou hui. Ko tiraka e nui tātou, a katohi au te tohi anuku, katohi au te tohi arangi. He tupu e hoko ngā pū, ngā wau, ngā more, ngā pūke, ngā nā wānanga, ngā tauhira. A tēnei te kimi no te rapu no e te take, te ahuru no nā arangi tū. Whakaia ki arite, uhi, wero, tau mai te Māori, haumi e, hui e, tāiki. Kia ora tātou.
Can you hear us down the back? Thank you. So welcome councillors and staff and members of the public. We also have online with us our Chief Executive, Stephen Perdia, Councillor Rangiaho and Janine Joyce from the Three Waters team. So welcome. We're live streaming today, and YouTube channel. Public gallery attendees' presence implies your consent to being broadcast. Further information about live streaming protocols can be found on the Council's website. So for health and safety, in case of an emergency, follow the building wardens to the nearest exit, which are highlighted with the green lights. And our meeting point is across the road at Peace Park by the museum. Bathroom facilities are located to the left of the door as you came in from the Margaret Mahi Park. So next item 3 on our agenda, apologies, and we have none at this point. Acknowledgements and tributes. My pleasure to announce that it's Councillor Tanjos's birthday today. Happy birthday, sir. May you have many more. Any other acknowledgements or tributes? I'll also note that Councillor Isles.
Thank you, Chair. On the weekend, I had the privilege of attending a couple of functions in the Wainui area. On Saturday, myself, along with about 70 other invited people, mainly descendants of the original settlers into Wainui, gathered at what was Basil and Pat Simpson's original residence, now known as Bloom Batch. And it was to celebrate the book launch of Wainui and Wangaraura, the settlers and the schools from 1895 to 1973. This was work that was started by the late Basil Simpson, and on his death in 2019, his widow Pat handed over what had been researched to the Oporiki Museum. And it was from there that Lorna Ackman took up the challenge of completing the works. Again, we were privileged to or as part of the funding, Whakatane District Council provided some of the community matching fund, and Lorna has made available copies of the book both to councillors and staff, plus also copies for the museum and for the library. So it was a great get together of families from those original settling families, and many a good conversation was discussed. On the Sunday, I then had the privilege of attending the annual general meeting of the Nukaho Saltmarsh Care Group, and that care group has been in operation now for something like 24 years. It is the passion originally of Margaret and Stuart Slade, and again, their advancing years, they're sort of looking at council hopefully going to step into the breach to look after the maintenance and the ongoing maintenance of that reserve situated on the corner of Wainui and Burke Roads. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Isles. Mayor Luca.
Oh, well, since we're doing this sort of thing, I had the privilege of attending the AGM of the Scottish Pipe Band yesterday. They do quite a lot for us. I mean, you know, what would a Christmas parade or Anzac Day be without them? They operate on a shoestring, and I gave them our appreciation anyway. Thank you.
Thank you. Mayor Luca. Julie. No, Councillor Julie.
That's all right. Thank you. Yes, I just wanted to acknowledge one of our local firefighters, Jeff Brown. He went in the New Zealand Sky Tower Challenge, where they have to go all the way up the stairs on the Sky Tower full kit, and he came third in the over 65 category, so it's nice to get local person so high up in the results. So congratulations to Jeff.
High up, all right.
Yeah, literally.
Yeah, I'd struggle to run up there without any gear on, even on that. But anyway, I mean, those guys are unsung heroes, really, and they do a lot of stuff that we don't realise. So, yeah, congratulations for that. The other thing I'd just like to announce, if I've not missed anybody, is that we have Simon Court, MP, presenting to us at 11 o'clock. So thanks to Councillor Boynton for making some arrangements to have him come in person. So we're looking forward to that. Mayor Luca will formally introduce him at the time. So look forward to that. Conflicts of interest, do we have any? And there's really two items. There's non-financial and financial conflicts. None? There being none, thank you. So we jump to item 7, which is confirmation of the minutes of our meeting held on the 10th of April. So are there any corrections to those minutes? If there's none, I'll call for a mover and a seconder, please. So Councillor Tanjos and Councillor Isles, moved and second. Any debate? So the resolution is that the public minutes of the Infrastructure and Planning Committee meeting held on the 10th of April be confirmed as true and correct record. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Against, carried. Thank you. So next item is the speed limits. Who's talking to that?
I think they're just there to be received.
7.2.
They're just there as minutes of the subcommittee to be received by this committee.
Okay. Okay, so I guess I was just asked if we're talking about the minutes of the speed limit subcommittee, and they're on pages 10 to 15, and the resolution is on page 10. So we have a mover in Councillor Isles, seconder in Councillor Dennis. Are there any corrections that we need to make to those minutes? Those present? Okay. So I'll read the resolution. Page 10 again, that the Infrastructure and Planning Committee confirmed the subcommittee minutes held 28th April 2025 as true and correct record, and in accordance with Standing Order 7.2B, resolves to dissolve the Infrastructure and Planning Subcommittee as it has completed its task of considering the proposed speed limits for each road in the district to be included in the consultation process for the 2025 proposed discretionary speed limit changes. So we have a mover and a seconder. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Against, carried. So thanks, Chairman Isles, for that work you did there. Saved a lot of time for us.
Mr. Chair, can I ask, I realise we're just receiving the minutes. Can I ask a question about everything?
You can.
I was interested on, awesome. Thank you. I was just interested on the Wainui Road. It says the members did not agree to proceed with the consultation, but asked for staff to discuss further with Opotiki. Do I understand that as saying there was kind of a bit of support, but only if Opotiki wants to do, because otherwise you've got 2 speed limits halfway down the road. So
But perhaps Councillor Isles can answer that.
Thank you, Chair. The reason being that the Whakatane district boundary finishes at Harrison Road, and with the work that's being undertaken at the Matakarapu intersection, it was asked by the committee that they would refer it back to Opotiki to see if there could be a agreed.
Yep.
Yeah. So that's basically where it's laid at this stage.
Thank you.
Does that answer your query?
Absolutely.
Thank you, Councillor. Right, so our next item is reports, and that's item 8, and it's the Three Waters Consent Replacement Program, pages 16 to 24, and that's Jess and Janine. Welcome, Janine. Welcome, Jess and Nicholas. Floor is yours, whoever's Who's taking that? You taking it, Jean, or Janine, or Jess?
Yes, I will. Yep.
Okay.
So good morning, everybody, from not so sunny Christchurch. So I'll just take the report as read, and just a quick general update from the 10th of April IPC meeting. Obviously, just due to we're still needing to get better understanding of the wastewater environmental performance standards. What the project team or the program team have progressed with is the water consents. So we now have pretty much those 7 underway at different stages, including doing a planning assessment to better understand what we will need to be consenting around the Whakatane Hopi consent. So those are all now underway, and we have also commenced the Taniatua and the Murupara wastewater consent replacement projects, given that they won't be as impacted by the standards. We will still need the standards, but we feel that we can get on with those 2 consent replacement projects, so they have also commenced. And I'm happy to take any questions. Oh, I do note there was just a little error on paragraph 4.1.4, which is the water consent focus. Just be aware that the last sentence is not meant to have preparing at the end, so it just finishes with a number of the consents are already underway with a mix of in-house and consultants, full stop, and then the table that has been split onto the other page follows from that to give you the detail on those consents.
Thank you. Jess or Nicholas, you got anything to add?
No, nothing to add. I'm just here to answer any questions.
Thank you. So, questions of clarification? Anybody? Mayor,
I guess I'm just wondering when we expect those standards to come into effect, as in legally, activated.
Part of that will be contingent on when the water services bill is enacted, and I think we're expecting that sort of mid this year. There are always delays, so we're sort of banking on it being by the end of the year that we'll have those standards. There may be some changes based on submissions that have been received.
I don't think we've had any feedback on those yet. But.
No, and we do get, if it is enacted, we also do get an extension, but that extension is from the date of enactment rather than the date of the consent. So with a number of them being due in 2026, that will have an extension. However, we are still planning that all the water consents at this stage would be completed. We may just have a couple of our significant wastewater consents that will take a little bit more time.
Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good morning, everyone. Morning, Jess and Nick and Janine. I'm on page 22, which is where the budget is. And so we see what we allocated in the LTP. Our spend so far has been small because we're waiting on so many parts and activity to occur in the future. Just in terms of the budget that we've got allocated, should we have, as a consistent reporting back, any change to the assumptions so that we don't get to the point where all of a sudden this is $2 million more, and rather than having a review of it as we go along each quarter? Not sure who to send that to.
Yep, I can answer that from my perspective, and then David might be able to join me on it. But yes, the whole way through the program, the budget will be reviewed. Obviously, with whatever comes out of those environmental performance standards, there may be changes in the scale of consent replacement, especially for the wastewater projects, which obviously will have an impact on the budget. So once we've scoped the projects further, we believe the waters are probably the ones that are fairly solid in terms of what we need to do. We've got a number of just like for like consent replacements, and then we've got a bigger one with the Whakatane Hopi. But the wastewater consent replacements, once we've got more information on what those standards and what that bill could mean for our consent process, we will scope those projects and then be able to report back to you on what we think the budget implications would be. At this point, I would not be thinking that there would be any significant increases to the budgets. We're hoping that there will be efficiencies gained through the legislation.
Oh, loved your last sentence. Thanks, Janine.
Thanks, Janine. Councillor Boynton.
Oh, kia ora, thank you for the report. I just wondered too, with the Honourable Simon Court coming here, he's the Under Secretary for Infrastructure, for the Minister of Infrastructure. Would some of the questions around the standards that are coming out be able to be asked to him when he arrives to present to us today? I'm just saying, would that be of value? Okay, thank you.
I think any questions within his portfolio is relevant. He should be the one to give you an answer. Yep.
Thank you. Any further question or clarification? There being none, the resolution is on page 16, that the Infrastructure and Planning Committee received the Three Waters Consent Replacement Program Update Report, May 2025. Do I have a mover and a seconder? Councillor James moves. Mayor Lucas seconds. Any debate? All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Against, carried. Thank you, team.
Thanks, team. See ya.
Thanks, Janine. So our next report is 8.2, Matatā and Murupara Storm Damage Report, pages 25 to 31. Jim's going to lead that. Thank you, Jim. Welcome.
Kia ora, everybody. Just first of all, sorry, there's a couple of points that I need to mention.
Jim, have you got your mic on? Yeah, thanks.
Yeah. Kia ora, everybody. Couple of points that I want to talk to in the report, which just need some further explanation, and one of them is, and I'm sorry about this, I should have got it right, it's the Rangataiki River, not the Whakatane River. I think if you go to the start of the Whakatane River, which is just downstream of Ruatahuna, you drive through Murupara, and it sort of fixed in my head that when you come down the river, you're actually going through Murupara. But yeah, so Rangataiki, that was on page 27 under 3.3. And the other thing is, there's a bit of bad news, but then we've got some good news to quickly follow up on, and that is with working through with the contractor up at Murupara, the cost of doing the repairs. We looked at a couple of options, but with the problem we've got with the height, we've got to come down about 5.5 metres in height. We need some sort of drop structure. So the cost that we've got is now 91,000 to do that work, but to do the quick arrest of the site has brought the overall cost to about 103,000 now. So it's from the 60 shown in the report to 103. Now, discussion with David, the council has each year got what we call a reactive emergency fund in our Three Waters, and in the stormwater we've still got about 219,000 in the kitty there, so we can cover that Murupara work and use the remainder to offset some of the cost at Matatā for the two streams. So the two streams there, you'll see I've got the cost there. That's quite accurate at the moment, although we did have another event last night, as you're aware, and the contractor's been out and checked our levels of where we go in and start removing sediment, and they haven't been exceeded just yet. So in that regard, the 230k is what I'm projecting, and we've got 70,000 in the kitty, which is put in each year for those streams to maintain our consent conditions. Some other good news there, the railways, which we've had a bit of a headache dealing with them because they're very hard to get to come to the site and to share costs. We've had a recently very good relationship, and they've been in and cleared their culverts, which, you know, are part of the risk to Matatā. If there's blockage in the railway culverts, we then have a chance of a debris dam forming, and then a surge over, and then a blow through, which could cause havoc from downstream from both of those streams. We've also got an issue, when the work was done in 2005, on the Waitipuri stream, so that's the one, you know, this side of Matatā on the eastern side, there's an overflow surge basin which goes there's a culvert under Manawa Road, and that basin was formed on council reserve land there, and it has a drain that then goes along the railway line and then underneath the railway line and out through Burt's Farm through to the Tarawera River. Well, that drain that the railways are supposed to maintain had become totally blocked up with raupo and other stuff, and houses that back onto that drain on Manawa Road were getting water that used to sit there for weeks, sometimes half a metre deep. So yesterday we got a breakthrough with them. They're going in to clean that drain out, and that will relieve those properties down there. So, now I mentioned it in the report there that, it's kind of terrible that this, we're just sitting there waiting for this all to happen, and then you have to clean up each time. And if you don't, you're then going to, possibly have flooding down the highway through the town from both of those streams. And okay, back in 2005-06, when the event happened, the consultants came up with this idea of building a big sort of debris catch thing up in the top of the Awatariki stream, and that was going to cost something, I think in those days, about 18 million, which would probably be at least double that today if it was attempted. But it was rejected in the end because it would create a risk in itself, because if it built up full of debris and rocks and that, it could then break through and it would be just absolutely catastrophic downstream. I've been up to both streams just last week with our contractor who's been doing the clearing work since 2000. Becoming a bit of a, terrible thing for him. It's like someone having a party in your house every week, and you've got to go and clean up the mess, and it's just not on. You want to find a solution. So we had a look at the possibility of creating some weirs out of the natural rock. So don't take anything up there. Just build these shallow weirs, so they're not actually dams, but then we would regrade the stream, because what's happened is the stream, 20 years ago it was here, and now it's like this. So you've got all that energy that's roaring through, and if you can, put a pile of rocks down here and a pile of rocks there and a pile of rocks there, you will then get the sediment filtering up on those. So that will give us, remove some of that action that's ripping through. But in doing that, we've done an estimate we need another 100,000 on the Awatariki and another 40,000 on the Waitapuri to do that corrective work. So there's 140,000. Now, again, we've got this reactive emergency money which gets refreshed after the 1st of July. So there's an opportunity to do that. Otherwise, we just keep going the way we're going, and that is, let the sediment come down and then truck it away and wait for the next load sort of thing. So I'll bring another report back to council with more detail on that, because it was after I prepared this report and haven't had a full opportunity to discuss, the way forward with David as yet. So yeah, that's.
Do you want any action on that request now, Jim, or are you going to talk about it another time?
Yeah, sorry, David.
Can we deal with that issue another time? I think the appropriate way of dealing with it is through either a further report to council or within our budgets once we roll into the new financial year.
Okay, so any questions? And I have one first, I guess. So Jim, when you build those weirs, then do you then have to clear out the sediment behind those every so often? Is that an ongoing thing?
No, the plan would be that becomes the recreated stream. So it's just going to slow this whole process down and retain the first probably 2 or 3 years drop. It would go in behind those levels, and that's why we'd create those weirs. Richard Mahi, the contractor, took me to a stream just downstream from Awakiri, where 20 years ago these things were put in to do the regrading, and under the regional council they maintain that, and he's been keeping an eye on that stream for them, and they've been quite successful in regrading the stream. So that was the where we got the idea from.
Thank you. Yeah, so just before Councillor O'Brien.
Yeah, so I'll just add to what Jim has said. I wanted to, I guess, highlight firstly that, the costs you're seeing today are those as a result of engineered works following that 2005 debris flow. And so at one level, those works have worked. You know, we actually probably saved Matatā from greater flooding as a result of where the Awatarariki discharged to filling those stormwater ponds. And at the Waitaparu, they did discharge the way they were supposed to. But I guess the consequence of doing those works is these sorts of costs on an ongoing basis. And I think as we see more frequent events occurring, particularly in Matatā, in that area, it does seem to have a propensity to rain heavily in that location. You know, we are likely to see these sorts of costs continue into the future. So I think Jim alludes to it in the back end of the report around, I think there is some further conversations around us working with the Regional Council around their management of the upper catchment, Kiwi Rail around their assets and NZTA around their assets, and potentially DOC in and around the lagoon itself as well. And I think it is a bit of a combined effort and a bit more of a focus on how we can either further mitigate these risks or manage the costs as we go forward. And I think that also potentially comes into some conversations around what is, the growth of Matatā as a township itself, because, more houses, more risk. So I think there's further work on an ongoing basis to be done there in a broader sense. Do you want me to cover off the resolutions at this stage, given that there is some further budget that's been found and what that means? I can do that if you wish.
We'll do that in a minute, David, I think.
Okay.
Just let Councillor O'Brien had a question.
Oh, no, just Jim, I went up, I guess, to Nukuhau with Roger Wall, Tim Ferguson and them doing those weirs, looking for some more resource consent. Those weirs are working up there, and they're looking for consent for 3 more. So I support the fact that you're going to be putting those weirs up to Southern India and liaising with those guys, because they're doing some great work up there. I think it'll work well. So thank you.
Okay.
Okay.
Any other, Councillor Dennis?
Thank you, Mr Chair. It was really pleasing, Jim, to see that the railways have gone and cleaned out their thing. When I presented at a regional transport meeting a couple of weeks ago, we were lucky to have 2 railway representatives on board there, so we specifically stated to them that part of the issue was their lack of maintenance, so that's good to see. When I met with the NZTA Bay of Plenty Waikato operations manager, Andrew Corkle, on Monday, and also Sandy King, when we discussed that Moores Bridge issue, we also pointed out their lack of maintenance just up from between the railway bridge and Moores Bridge, and he gave an assurance that they're going to get on and clean that really quickly, because he considered it low cost gains very quickly. And he was quite interested in the swerve the creek does before it goes under Moores Bridge, and the amount of trees growing in their part, which caused it to overflow worse than it could have. So that's really pleasing to see, and we'll look forward to NZTA cleaning under their road bridge soon too, especially upstream from it. Thank you.
Further questions? The resolution which is on...
Mr Chair.
Oh, sorry.
It's all right, no problem, Mr Chair. I just wasn't sure whether it was Jim or David that mentioned something about regional council. So considering the Matatā situation between the train and the 2 streams, can we get funding from them to assist us? Because it's coming from them above, isn't it? As it flows down through the towers where it hits us.
Yeah, I think that's part of the conversation. We have this situation where, the regional council manage the upper catchments, the rural component, and once it hits an urban environment, it becomes our stormwater network. And so, of course, at the moment, everything is ending up in our stormwater network. So I think that is part of a conversation to have around what are they doing actively to manage the catchments, cost sharing. It might be a difficult conversation, but we'll have it. So.
Just a supplementary. So why would it be a difficult conversation? I mean, it's cause and effect. With a number attached to it, yeah.
Yeah, I'm not sure they see it quite as straightforwardly as that.
is there anything we can do to assist the team in helping them with us to financially sort this?
There may be, but I think let us start the conversation.
Okay.
Or restart the conversation. We'll see where we get to. Yeah.
Right, thanks.
Are you thinking of lobbying some of the regional councillors?
Look, it's possible. There's lots going on at the moment for this coming year, and we want our share of regional council looking after the Eastern Bay just as much. And but if we want to get some political assistance rather than via the management team or then we need to be able to demonstrate cause, effect, cost.
So I think David's taken that on board, so
Okay.
We can work through that. But you're right, I think sometimes you have to. Okay, we've got, Councillor Boynton.
David, thank you for the report. And just seeing as these are extra costs, how do we absorb that? Do we find savings in other areas, or we just take on that extra debt that, over, because it's gone over the budget?
Yes, I think in this case there is a good news story, which I haven't yet told you, around the actual dollar figure. It is unbudgeted, and so potentially just because it's, it'll either be just straight overspend that we can attempt to absorb in the mass of the council budgets. But I guess what we're really saying to you, being overt about it, is it could be an overspend, straight overspend.
Jim. Jim's going to say something, and then Councillor Riles afterwards.
Okay.
Jim?
Just to let you know, that question you said about what the regional council can do about it, we have actually approached them over the years, and at an operational level, they have said they would only be intervening or doing anything if they had a funding scheme, like the Tarawera Rangataiki or the Whakatane Tauranga schemes, where they have a funding base so they can then project work. But I had another idea, which I've spoken briefly to David about it, and he's told me that they maybe would not entertain this, but maybe at a political level, and that is when you drive into Matatā, that's the beginning of the Eastern Bay of Plenty, and I believe with the iwi there, Ngāti Rangatihi, who want to do things with their the old Rangataiki riverbed that used to roar through there and ships used to come in, and the regional council went and ruined it all by straightening the Tarawera River. That lagoon was condemned then because it's got not enough flushing to maintain it. So the southern end of it is getting full and fuller of reed, and they don't want to touch it because they say you'll destroy the marine life, and then you're not allowed to, so you can't spray anything. You need a certain amount of clear water area in lagoons for the health of them, and DOC is left with that, and they're not doing anything. And then they blame us because they say the silt's getting in from the sea, and we're supposed to manage that by consent. So coming to the point here, I believe that it's the beginning of the Eastern Bay, and we should approach the regional council to make that a regional park, and it gets regionally funded, because it is a thing of beauty. We all know that. When it was cleared a couple of years back, and people were floating their boats on it, and it's worth maintaining or rescuing from the deeds of the past when the river was straightened. So I think we should approach the regional council about that. And when I was working in Opotiki, there was an issue with Brian's Beach, is a little beach west of Opotiki Township, and it has a stream that comes down from this farm, and the stream was found to be contaminated, and the contamination was blamed on the 68 houses that are at Brian's Beach because they're all on septic tank. But when it was found, we requested sampling done upstream of the houses, and the pollution was worse actually because of the concentration, because of the heavily stocked nature. So the regional council thought the best thing to do was to buy that farm and turn it into a regional park. It's the Only Way Reserve, I think that's called now. And So by the same token, you know, I think there's a good argument here to rescue the lagoon, but also because of the cost to the Whakatane community alone is just it's going to get worse and worse. I mean, you know, if you look at the climate change risks, there's a hell of a lot more stuff to come down. If you fly over Matatā, the first thing you think of when you look at it, it's just one big hellish landslide, looking at the nature of the geology. So, you know, I don't want to be a doomsdayist, but I think that you know, those streams are going to keep working like that for years to come. And as I say, if we could get the regional council on board, we could, you know, bring them to the funding table.
So Jim and Councillor O'Brien, perhaps the group that's working on the Tarawera,
That's those two there.
is that what is it?
Tarawera Restoration Strategy Group.
So is that an avenue for putting some pressure on, do you think?
It hasn't been suggested yet, because they're a Crown stood up entity themselves, and now we've got all the RMA changes, probably the focus is going to be, like Councillor O'Brien brought up the other day, what's going to happen to these other entities that sit outside the current RMA reform. But I really like the idea. I'm sure the Matatā residents would support it. How that might map into what the Tarawera Awa Forum is looking at, because their best case scenario is to have the exit out at the Waimarino, down at the western end, which is where the Tarawera River used to flow out of. That's their first preferred priority. We don't know whether it's engineering possible or not. So there's probably a few steps to go, but keeping that at the forefront of our mind and starting to ask a few questions, I think, is well worth it.
So, David, or you and Jim, really, is it? Yeah, I know you've got plenty to do, but is it worth bringing a paper along those lines that we could take direction on or do something with?
Is that an action you would like us to take?
That would be too premature, that's the word.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, within the Tarawera Awa Restoration Group, the hydrology is going to be analysed within that. I mean, I think it's a bit premature to start making relationships between where the river used to go and that effect compared to what's happening in the catchments for the three streams. They're not necessarily that related, and that needs to be clarified. So that's a work in progress.
So do you think during your meetings that this park thing could be in the back of your mind to develop on as part of your group or part of Councillor O'Brien?
Yeah, I'm certainly possible.
We should try and get money from wherever we can.
Can I just also add that there's still an outstanding conversation to be completed around the restoration of that Awatariki area following the managed retreat program, and we were requested by Ngāti Rangatihi at the time to just put that on hold while the restoration strategy and at the time their settlement in fact was going through. So we're probably at a point now where we can start to raise some of those issues again, and that may then lead to this other conversation.
Just a supplementary question back to Jim. Are you talking about the upper catchment being a regional park? Because do you normally have housing in amongst a regional park if it was upper, mid and lower?
No, I was thinking of the two lagoons basically as being the regional park. But, you know, what feeds the lagoon is the Atawariki, and there's another smaller stream, I just forget the name, that's in the middle of Matatā. But the maintenance and management of the lagoons would then include the sediment control, and therefore the upper catchment is an impactor on that. Even now, like 3 years ago, I think 2 or 3 years ago, we planted natives and removed the raupo around the edge of the lagoon. That all needs addressing again, and you know, there's another $40,000 or $50,000 worth of work involved in that. So, you know, that's outside of the numbers of the dollars we're talking about now, and you can see if it was a regional park, then there would be budget for doing that sort of work.
Right, thank you.
Can I just say something to that? When we cleaned that 4 or 5 years ago, the idea was that it was cleaned to such an extent that, say, every 4 or 5 years I'd be able to go down there and just do a bit of scratching around to take out the raupo before it actually took over the whole lagoon, which it did back 4 years ago. It almost cut off the bit beyond the tennis court. And I think what Jim's saying is right, that it would be good if we could just do a little bit here and there, and that would set it up for another 5 years. But where you're talking, Mick, about or Deputy Mayor, about the housing above the hills, the what's regarded as a scenic reserve, which has the hinterland, that is actually to the west of where the houses are. So the houses aren't part of that block, they're to the southeast, when we're talking Keruru Lane and Kokaka Heights. And so it's from the Waitapuru hinterland back towards the subways where you get the 3-stream hinterlands. And so that's all dock owned. With iwi have blocks of 20 acres each within that, but it's all managed by dock. So it could become a scenic reserve as part of the whole thing, because in regard to the joint advisory group that looks after that, they talk about the scenic reserve behind and the wildlife reserve in front. And so that whole thing is regarded as being one entity because they relate to each other so much.
So really the consensus is that there's work going on and that'll come out in the wash eventually, won't it? And at the right time.
Yeah, there's a lot of technical and engineering stuff that has to be investigated. We're actually quite a long way away from that, as far as I can tell at the moment.
But a good thought, Jim. Thank you.
Any ideas you have for generating money, Jim? Welcome.
Okay, so the resolution now, there's some amendment to that, which is on page 25, and is Alex, you're going to put up on the screen. David's going to talk to it.
Okay, so I think because of this emergency stormwater fund that we can use, we can probably combine the two resolutions into a single resolution. Really all we need is an unbudgeted expenditure of $112,000 overall. And so I think the resolution is simply to recognise that figure for stormwater remediation works, recognising for Awatarariki and Waitapuru, and also the pipe stormwater in Murupara. So simply, hopefully simplifying the request.
So that's the second one. So the first resolution is that the Infrastructure and Planning Committee receives the Matatā and Murupara storm damage report, and that the Infrastructure and Planning Committee approves the unbudgeted expenditure of $112,000 for storm damage remediation works on the Awatarariki and Waitapuru streams in Matatā, and for the reinstatement of the piped stormwater drain off Pine Drive in Murupara. So do I have a mover and a seconder? Mayor Luca?
I'll move it. I don't think there's any option, is there?
And seconded Councillor Isles. We got any debate?
I've got a few comments,
Thank you,
really
Mayor
to
Luca.
amplify what both David and Jim said. Matatā is built on the reflow. 5 catchments, 3 streams that run through it. Climate change is the elephant in the room, and we've seemed to have consistently underestimated the effects. Microclimates and there's a microclimate there, which is what David was alluding to. It's not totally predictable, but it looks like things are just going to keep getting worse. These rain bombs that come, now this is the second in 20 years, but they could, that doesn't have to be linear, could be another one in a year or two. And so we're planning on building out, I think would be, and Alex, feel free to minute this, because I think this would be a mistake to densify Matatā with what's going on there at the moment. This has to be fixed, and the people that are there have to be given some comfort. So we've got no choice but to go ahead.
Thank you, Mayor Luca. Any further debate?
Can I just clarify the comments by the Mayor? Are you suggesting when you say don't intensify Matatā, are you saying no more houses until we fix out what's going on there?
I think we need to be very careful in how we proceed, given that we could just be seeing the tip of an iceberg here.
Does that link in with your views that you've talked about not supporting Matatā sewage scheme?
Oh, it's a separate issue, but I mean, the places that are there now. But yeah, I'm talking about really what happens going forward in terms of extra houses. Because are we going to be faced with this sort of thing every year or two? And you know, we should also think about having more in our fund to deal with these sorts of events, because it's pretty sparse what we've got in there. I mean, here we are with an unbudgeted spend of 112,000. So I think these events are going to get more frequent and worse. I think it's fairly clear. It depends where exactly the intensification is going on too, because if it's in the higher areas away from the stream, that's one thing. Well, not intensification, I think further development. That's a different issue to actually building out in the existing areas. Do we want to have another managed retreat? Anyway, it needs to be properly considered, I think. That's all the point I'm trying to
I
make.
agree with you. It's an extremely complicated situation. If you put off the reticulated sewage scheme, you've basically got managed retreat of 95 houses. So, and I'm sure regional council will want this council to add to the money pot, and so that's even more cost. So it is a complicated situation and needs to be thought through carefully.
Yeah, I'm not linking the two things at the moment. I'm just talking about these disastrous events, which, I mean, I was surprised of the 4th of February event, which we barely felt here, really. The last thing I thought was that there was going to be a problem over in that area, yet the rain seems to dump on those ranges. I mean, people who have lived here for a long time know that there's a particular climate there, and how that responds to climate change, well, I think it's just going to be more frequent and more intense. So, and the rate of change is increasing too. Anyway, I'll leave it at that.
It's really a bit of a how long's a piece of string, really, and I think the development is more likely on higher ground, but we need to, you're right, you need to consider that. Councillor Isles.
Thank you, Chair. Just going back, we ended up with 112,000 unbudgeted, right? We were putting aside 250,000 with a cap of $1 million for storm-related works. Are we still?
Yeah, to be honest with you, I'm not quite sure where we're at with that fund. It didn't come through in terms of the finance response to how we could manage this funding. So I'd need to get clarification whether there's a further pot of money out there.
Okay.
I guess I'm slightly reluctant, you know, we're clearing this pot out completely, and you've heard there might be plans to clear some of next year's already ahead of events, and so I'm just a little bit wary of dipping too much into all the jam jars that we might have, but yeah,
Okay.
I'll take your point.
Worth a look.
We can have a look.
Thank you, David.
Well, I mean, given that the regional council is already putting up flood defences in response to climate change, there seems to be a fairly clear argument here for more assistance. I mean, what would be the difference between protecting Matatā and doing the flood protection that we're doing here? I mean, those are the sort of arguments we can make, but let's try and squeeze them.
Okay, any further debate? If there is none, I'll put the motion. All those in favour, please say. Oh, we had a mover and a second. Oh, hang on a minute. Yep. Yes. Yes, thank you. So, all those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Against, carried. Thank you. Thank you, Jim. So, next item is 8.3, which is the Matatā Road Motorsport and the Strand Light Up Wakatani event road closures. So that's Annalise. Welcome.
Morning, everyone.
That's on page 32 to 35. Thank you.
Thank you. So I will take the report as read. The only thing to add to it, it was commented in there at the time of publishing the agenda. We had consulted with the New Zealand Transport Agency and Police, but hadn't heard back. We have since heard back, and they are both supportive of both the road closures. They had no issues with the closures proposed. So this report is just to seek IPC's recommendation so that we can put it forward to council for approval for 2 road closures to enable the safe and successful operation of 2 upcoming events in July. Happy to take any questions.
Councillor Dukes.
Thank you. Just in recommendation 3, you're mentioning that you're going to close the Strand from 6 till 7:30 p.m. Just wanting to check what time that means you will be sort of preparing to close it. I want to just ensure that it's outside normal trading hours on that Saturdays. Like sometimes an event might be at 12 o'clock, but cones are out at 8 o'clock and the Strand gets blocked. So I'm just wanting to confirm it's after normal trading hours. Thanks, Annalise.
Sure. So the actual parade is actually only running from 6:30 p.m. till 7 p.m. So the extra half hour is to allow for that closure to be enacted. There will be some traffic management going in around the car park area, I believe, during the day, but the actual Strand closure and any impacts on traffic flow won't be until at least after 6 p.m. and will be done and dusted by 7:30 p.m.
Can I just confirm? So the car park, what sort of time will that be? Because it generally shops close around 2, so the car parks would be pretty empty starting to get around after that time.
Yeah, I might have to come back to you on that one. Sorry, I didn't include that detail in here, just the detail around the actual. And yeah, because it's a car park, it didn't trigger the same legislative requirements, but I can surely come back to you on that.
I'm only saying that just if they do anything, it's much easier for them if they do it like 3
Outside.
or 4 o'clock.
Yeah, I believe that's the plan, that they want to have as minimal impact as possible, but I can come back to you.
Yeah, no, it's a great thing. Thanks.
Councillor Dennis.
Thank you. In regard to the Matatā road closure, where we close roads for motorsports and other things, I know they do Manuahei quite often for rally driving and all that. Is it really worth it to us for the amount of road that they rip up? And especially with Matatā, because I don't know if that part of the road is tar sealed or still gravel. How much damage do they do? How much does it cost us or advance the need for maintenance biased against the benefit of actually allowing these people to use the roads, and how much does it affect the locals? Is there a benefit one way or the other?
So it is a bit of a complex benefit cost situation. In terms of physical damage to the road, there are bonds put in place between the event organisers and council so that any damage that is done can be the repairs can be recuperated. We also try to time any scheduled maintenance around when those rallies are going to happen. So instead of doing a grade, especially for the unsealed roads, instead of grading it just before, we'd time that so that the regular grade would happen afterwards, so that it didn't have any additional impact. This section of Matatā Road is sealed, and we do pre and post inspections of the sections of road that are used for the event. We do all that we can to make sure that there's no significant additional costs to council's roading budgets as a result of this. In terms of impacts on the residents, obviously there are impacts during the event when that road is closed. The event organisers do a fair bit of consultation with the locals, especially the ones within the actual closure, to make sure that they are supportive of it prior to it going ahead. People that use the road, it's always a difficult line to draw how far you can go to sort of let a drop and advise them, but there's quite a lot of communication that goes in to ensure that those people are aware of the road closure. And then in terms of benefits, like these events do often bring economic benefit to the area. The different rallies and events run in different ways. Some of them, like the one that runs through sort of Manuahei and the unsealed roads, often shares around between us, Rotorua and Western Bay, because it uses all 3 of our local roads. So they try and arrange the host day to be in the different areas on a sort of cycle. So some years we'll see a greater benefit compared to other years when the host days might be in one of the other regions. But yeah, in general, there are benefits to events happening in our region. It brings, tourism and new visitors into the area, but I don't have the detailed quantities.
Actually, now that you mention it, I noticed one of the last rallies up Manuahei that they used the football club as their staging post, and a lot of the local sports groups did barbecues and hungies and all that, so the local groups benefited. But it would still cost us for our people to go and inspect before and after, and also do the extra grading, but you think that's balanced out by the benefit?
Yeah, so again, we have fees and charges that cover our staff time involved in managing these applications. So the staff inspection time that is involved is covered through that process. Also, we've got road inspectors that are out on the road every day. So again, we just make sure that we're timing these things in with our regular rounds rather than doing an extra special trip.
Councillor Boyden.
I just wanted to clarify, so every single road closure that happens has to come through council?
Not every road closure.
Yeah, because I'm thinking,
yeah.
we've seen plenty of events where the roads have been closed and I've never seen them come through for approval.
There's a number of road closures that don't require formal council approval for particular events that require the closing of a road. That is what we need to bring to council for approval.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any further points of clarification? So what I propose, we can take the three recommendations as one. Thank you. So I'll read them out. They're on page 32. That the Infrastructure and Planning Committee receives the Matatā Road Motorsport and Strand Light Up Wakatani Event Road Closures Report. And 2, that the Infrastructure and Planning Committee recommends that Council approve a temporary road closure on Matatā Road from 551 Matatā Road to the Wakatani district boundary on Sunday, 6th of July 2025 between 9 a.m. and 5 p.m. to accommodate the Motorsport Hill Climb event. And 3, that the Infrastructure and Planning Committee recommends that Council approve a temporary road closure on Saturday, 5th of July 2025 from 6 p.m. to 7:30 p.m. to accommodate the Light Up Wakatani event affecting the strand between Kākahora Drive and Whārangi Kākahora Drive. And then Kākahora Drive between the strand and Kākahora Drive service lane 1, the full length of Kākahora Drive service lane and the full length of Kākahora Drive service lane. So I guess we reading that right? It's a lot of repetition there. Anyway, that's the resolution. So mover, Councillor Isle, second, Councillor James. Any debate? All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Against, carried. Thank you, team. So our next item is 8.4, which is the Burma Road closed landfill upgrade works and landfill provisions, pages 36 to 57. That's you, Nigel. Welcome. Floor is yours.
Through the chair, good morning, everyone. So the first report I have for you today, the Burma Road landfill upgrade works and landfill provisions. I will take the report as read. There's basically two main sections to the report. The first one is an update on the works that we've been doing at the Burma Road closed landfill, following the report that we gave to Infrastructure and Planning Committee around 1 year ago on the proposed works. And the second part of the report is basically a summary of work that Council are doing on landfill provisions, which is how we fund such works and future planned works as well, and the need for those landfill provisions and how climate change effects are actually affecting those provisions as well. And I'm happy to take any questions. I also have Jim here who will help me on any technical details, but yeah, happy to take any questions.
So, points of clarification, Mayor Victor.
I think I've asked this question before, and maybe you supplied some information which I can't find, but in terms of, I mean, this project seems to be growing in scale, and at that previous meeting, I think I asked about the leachates, the analysis of the leachates. Can you make any comment now about the level of contaminants in those leachates?
Yeah, so following those comments, I did forward the annual report and the monitoring results in June last year, and I'll forward that again to David this morning so we can put those through. We're currently, the annual reports are due in May, so we're just waiting for the last year, but that one was from May last year. So basically, the leachates themselves, they're monitored in line with consent requirements, and that is the discharges to the environment. So there's discharges to the ponds themselves, and also the stream that runs around past the cemetery. So we monitor, I think it's 3 points further down, up to 700 metres downstream. Generally, the leachate, the measurements of those discharges are within consent requirements. There is occasional breaches, and then what we do is when that happens, we retest, but every time we've done that, the retest has been within resource consent requirements. As we outlined in the report last year, the need for these works was due to overflows from the leachate storage pond, but that was mainly caused by stormwater overland flows. Even when we've tested those overflows, they've also been within the resource consent requirements. And the leachate itself is also monitored as well before any discharge, and those results are within the results that are forwarded last year as well. So there's no actual requirements on the leachate content itself prior to discharge, but there are the consent requirements after any discharge. But the leachate itself is actually pumped to the wastewater system. So any discharge to the environment would be from an event or any seepage that we may not be aware of.
Yeah, I mean, it just seems to me that we're then spending quite a bit of money on something that's not absolutely essential.
Yeah.
I mean, you're not finding heavy metals or the usual culprits like PCBs and things like that, or low?
Yeah, the leachate does have heavy metal content in it.
Yeah, but below regulatory.
But below, I think what we need to take into account is that when these landfills, of which we have 6, were constructed, they were not constructed to today's standards.
And I mean, rule number 1 is keep it away from water.
Yeah.
And the stream runs down alongside it.
It does. It runs along the base of the. When they were built, these considerations weren't really taken into place. Weren't built to good engineering standards, and it's now that those actions are now coming back to bite us.
Thanks.
Deputy Mayor, Emma.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good morning. Hi, Nigel. I've got a couple of questions about the infringement notices from Regional Council and the auditors. So, why did we say the work was undertaken under emergency works and they counted that?
So I'll just clarify that. So basically, we undertook the works as emergency works because we were of the opinion that if we waited for full resource consent process to go through, there could be another weather event which resulted in another discharge. That was the main reason for doing it under emergency works. The Regional Council were well aware of this, and while the works were ongoing, we had several joint site visits, but they didn't actually give us their opinion and take action until we'd actually just about finished the works. The infringement notices, of which there were two, one was for placing excavated material in a place where it could have been exposed to stormwater, not for actually doing emergency works. Even though when they visited site at the time, we undertook measures that they recommended to control that issue by placing silt fences around the material, and we actually covered all the material with polythene to stop any runoff. The second infringement notice was for taking longer than 2 months to do the works,
Because of the weather.
which we had no control over. We took the opportunity when dealing with this issue to actually upgrade the infrastructure as well, which needed doing because it was old infrastructure. So that is why the works took so long. As well as addressing the emergency issue, it made sense to do all the other works at the same time. As far as the emergency works is concerned, their opinion afterwards was that we shouldn't have done the works as emergency works, and they put us on notice for doing so.
The department's not busy enough.
Unfortunately, Bevan's not here today, but he's still having those conversations with regional council because it's quite upsetting that the overall aim of these works was to reduce environmental harm. That's their purpose, but we couldn't seem to work together to actually to achieve that goal.
Oh, thank you for that, and I feel that frustration. The second question was about the auditors, and it was really great to have that in there because I can see the rationale for why we did things. So they had a visit on the 29th of April. Did they get to understand our position?
I think it did help. We took them to site and we showed them the works that have been done. I think it did help to aid their understanding. The provision, it's an issue that they are experiencing with other councils because the provisions is something that's coming to the forefront now as resource consents for landfills are coming close to expiry. People are thinking about what are their liabilities, how do we manage these things going forward, and with the climate change effects, etc. And so that overall provision work is something that we are looking at on a forward planning basis. The auditors originally, I think they had difficulty in understanding that events happened that weren't planned, and they couldn't seem to grasp the idea that we couldn't put dates or monetary amounts on those events. That was one of the major discussions at the beginning. So we are working with other councils trying to put together ideas on how we actually manage provisions going forward. Bevan organised a meeting last week with a number of other councils, and we're all looking at how we try to get some standardisation on this because everybody's sort of doing it differently, on how we manage that forward. But yep, I think it did help to get the auditors there, but there's plenty of conversations to be had.
All right, thank you very much for that, and it's just, I guess we might see this again and reflected in our auditors' fees for next year.
Yep.
Thanks.
So before I ask Councillor James and then Councillor Rangiaho, just a note for staff, we're going to take a break after this one and come back about 20 past 10, so if you got other things to do, please feel free to go. We'll see you back. Thank you, Councillor James.
Yeah, morning gentlemen, and thanks for the report. The other 5 sites that we've got, first question is, are they presenting problems at the moment? And the second one is, the costs that we've got budgeted in, are they just precautionary costs or expected problems to happen?
Yep. First question, TECO has been presenting us with problems. Last year we had to do some major recapping of TECO landfill. That's down Tahuna Road. The landfill is basically in an old oxbow lake from the river. There is a slope on the edge of the landfill site, and we basically had to clear that and recap that whole area last year. We actually also discovered a small area on that landfill 2 weeks ago, and we've just done some work to recap that area as well within the last 2 weeks. So yes, Tateko's prevented us with issues. Excuse me. Also on Tateko, we've had following the Kawarau earthquakes, we had a stream appear over the landfill. So we had to basically put a pipe that over the landfill to stop it eroding the cap. That stopped flowing now, but we're also going through resource consent issues with that, with the regional council. The only other landfill that we've needed to do work on is Matatā, but that's just basically maintenance work. We've cleared the vegetation on that landfill. We mulched the whole site, and then a couple of months ago we actually sprayed the site as well. And then the next stage will be to do replanting on that landfill, but we need to have conversations with Ngāti around what plants we need on there, because we don't want ones that penetrate deep with roots, because it can disturb the cap. But that's a future plan. The other landfills are pretty stable. The costs that we've put in the provisions are cautionary, not actual. They are based on a risk basis. So WSP consultants did the work for us, and they've looked at each individual landfill, the characteristics of the landfill. So as we've said, like Tateko, Burma, etc., we know that there's specific problems that come up. So they've looked at the risks based on each landfill, used previous costs for responding to incidents and maintenance, etc., and then they've come up with those costs. There are some actual costs in there, which are for environmental assessments and renewal of resource consents when the consents expire.
Councillor Rangiaho, and then Councillor Boynton.
Morning. Thanks, Nigel, for your report, and I suppose I'm just going to head into the resource consenting. Considering our resource consent expires in 2040, Nige, that's 15 years away. Is there some, and we won't be able to review it till after 2040, is the conversation going to be had whether or not we be able to review that resource consent because of what we're seeing? Because there's going to be a lot of, we're starting to incur infringement notices with practices that we're seeing in front of us, but our resource consent, is that something, a likely conversation with the regional council?
Yes, there is. We need to have a lot of conversations with the regional council. We will be seeking guidance from them as those consents near their expiry date. We will need to have those conversations. What we expect at this time is that as those consents expire, we will probably be required to carry out an environmental assessment of each landfill. So that will mean looking at previous monitoring results, state of the landfill, and making some sort of decisions on whether we need to actually renew or replace those consents or whether they can just expire. That will obviously be decisions for the regional council, but we can expect quite a bit of work to undertake those assessments and any renewals as they come up.
Thank you.
Councillor Boynton.
I was just wanting to get a wider picture for some of our whānau, I guess, around the health risk impacts that some of the contamination that happens, like with the Burma Road, and often we see notices come up where it impacts on the Wairere stream and people being able to use those areas and the impact into the waterways. Can you just give a wide picture of, I guess I'm just trying to see how important that work that needed to be done and why, particularly how it impacts our whānau and our waterways like Wairere stream. Can you?
Yeah, the monitoring we undertake is basically to comply with the consents. Those consents are set by the regional council. I think they're more along the lines of environmental limits than health limits. I couldn't actually comment on health effects. It doesn't actually, that aspect doesn't come under our requirements under consents. So they are monitored for environmental limits, but not actual health limits as such. So,
Okay.
yeah.
I just wanted to say, because we see those notices about the Wairere stream, and it's usually because there's been overflow from there, and just wanted to get clarification. Thanks.
There being no further points of clarification, we've got the resolution on page 36 and we'll take them all together. I'll read them and then call for a move and a second. That the Infrastructure and Planning Committee receive the Burma Road closed landfill upgrade works and closed landfill provision report. And 2, that the Infrastructure and Planning Committee acknowledge the challenges of managing closed landfills. And 3, that the Infrastructure and Planning Committee note that there is work to do as a sector to ensure that appropriate provisions are made for the management of closed landfills as we near the end of the first aftercare period. So, move and a seconder, please. Councillor James and Councillor O'Brien, any debate? Deputy Mayor.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm just wondering, what are the purpose of the second and the third resolutions? Like that we acknowledge that it's a difficult subject or activity, and they don't seem to have a function, except appreciating that it's difficult.
I see that as acknowledging that Nigel's got a hard road to hoe there and his team in terms of, and I think that's fair. There isn't a
Action point from it. No.
action point for us, but it is important that we note it's going to be an ongoing thing, I think, and that Nigel's alluded to that.
Yeah.
Difficult, really.
Absolutely do appreciate everything you do very much, Nigel. Yeah.
Yes, thank you, Nigel.
Councillor Riles.
Just a comment, if I may. I'm just reading through these reports and looking at the landfills that we've had historically across the whole district. They really are coming back to bite us in the backside big time, aren't they? They certainly weren't a cheap way of disposing of rubbish back in the day, as we're seeing now by the ongoing consents and expenses we've got to incur. So, yeah, work well done, Nigel.
Time evolves, Councillor, and that's where we have to be, I guess. So, any further debate? Mayor Luca?
Well, I guess we don't want to exaggerate either. I mean, we don't want to end up with a situation like the road safety management, where it goes ballistic either. I mean, back in the day, they probably thought it was a good idea to put the landfill next to the stream so that the contaminants would be washed out into sea and be diluted. So maybe that wasn't such a bad idea. I don't know, but what was okay once is now no longer okay. But we've got to get things into context and keep some cool heads, because humans generate wastes, and it's just the way it is.
The other comment going forward, and given the size of maybe Titiko dump and the Matatā dump, would it be more affordable in the long run to dig them up? I know Kawerau Tasman Mills did a thing like that. They actually dug up their landfill and they separated out into the different things and got rid of it. I know the Mayor's looking horrified at that idea at the cost, but going forward, what would the cost be?
One word, PFAS.
I think that was raised actually, Nigel, one other session about removing it and was prohibitive, if I understand.
It has been done. There are other landfills where that has been done. It's often taken as a last resort when the risks become too high. Where that has occurred is where there's usually where they've been next to rivers or the coast, and erosion has exposed them, but it's not possible to actually deal with the waste in situ. It's something we may have to consider in the future.
Because you're looking at Taneatua, Titeko by the rivers and Matatā by the sea. It's like we picked the worst places to put them. And if you look at Fox Glacier down there, when they lost their landfill into the sea, look at the mess that occurred.
Yeah. We have done some risk assessments. I think the one that is probably the most at risk is Matatā, as it's actually in the dunes. At the moment, we don't see any risk of it actually being eroded at the moment, and we've looked at the sea level rises, and obviously Matatā itself is rising slightly as well, so we don't see any immediate risk, but yeah, it could be an action that we need to take in the future.
Thank you, Nigel. So no further debate. I'll put the motion. All those in favour, or three motions. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Against, carried. Thank you. So we'll take a break till 15:30. Director's report, which is 8.5. We on live? We are. Thank you. Floor's yours.
Through the chair, thank you. So my second report this morning is basically to seek submission from the Infrastructure and Planning Committee to put a submission to central government on the proposed changes to the Waste Act and the Litter Act. Just a quick summary. What central government is proposing is a number of changes which include creating a framework for extended producer responsibility. What that means is we currently have under the Waste Act legislation for product stewardship, but what extended producer responsibility does is actually shifts more responsibility onto the producers themselves, so that the producers become responsible for their products at the end of life, but also pushes them towards using more recyclable materials within their products, that sort of thing. They're also proposing changes on how the waste levy is allocated to territorial authorities, and that will affect the amount of money that we receive for funding waste minimisation initiatives. They're also proposing what we can spend that, changes to what we can spend that levy on. There are changes to they are clarifying roles and responsibilities in waste and litter for central government, local government and the waste sector. Improving tools for compliance, monitoring and enforcement. Basically putting the two acts, the Waste Act and the Litter Act, into one new act, and enabling efficient and effective controls for littering and mismanaged waste, such as piles of waste on people's properties, illegal dumping, that sort of thing. So that's a quick summary of the changes. Attached to the report is our proposed submission. The format of that submission follows how central government want us to respond, so I apologise it's not always straightforward to follow, but that's how they want us to respond to set questions. And I'm also joined by Nancy today from Regulatory Department, who may help if need be, and we're happy to take any questions.
Right, so questions of clarification? Councillor Boynton.
I suppose you may have highlighted it here, but with the changes that you had, and it says that it will impact on how the operations of the services, does that also impact on the costs or increase costs for council?
It could do. If there's an increase in compliance and enforcement, then that could result in further costs, because it could result in compliance officers undertaking further duties. So we may have to look at staffing in related to that. Excuse me. There is also other parts where they're proposing that central government can instruct local authorities to actually do something within their waste plans. So currently, as a local authority, there is no legislative requirement for us to supply curbside services. It is actually voluntary. But what they're proposing is that they could say that we have to do that. So they could say we have to do other things. I don't know. So they could actually dictate what services we have to provide, which means there may be cost implications there as well.
Nigel, and then I'll just ask, and then Councillor Tanjos, does this give council powers to deal with a property that's an absolute bomb site?
Yes, it does. There are proposed changes in there that will allow us to take under this Act to take enforcement against such properties and require them to actually tidy up that property. We can currently do that under the Health Act, I believe, but those changes are being proposed in here as well. Yeah.
Thank you. Councillor Tangos.
Thank you. This is amending a piece of legislation that I introduced into Parliament, so I've got quite a few questions, if that's all right. Thanks, Nigel, for this. Yeah, it's just a number of questions on the actual submission itself. The first one is on page 65. It says, do you continue discontinuing the government accreditation of voluntary product stewardship? And we've said yes. And I know that there's problems with the development of voluntary product stewardship, and one of them is around participation. But I'm just unclear why we would support ditching it entirely.
Yep. So the voluntary product stewardships are basically where industry comes up with the idea themselves. Under the current Act, central government can declare a priority product. If they declare a priority product, then the industry must respond with a product stewardship scheme. The voluntary schemes are where industry have just come up with a scheme without those steps need to be taken. What that means is there's a willingness there. Industry want to do the right thing. And under the current Act, they then go to central government and they will review it and they will accredit the scheme or not. What they're saying is that there's actually no need for them to do that, because they believe if industry is taking that action to come up with a scheme themselves, the intention is good, so they just want to remove that step of the extra paperwork for Ministry for Environment to actually accredit it. So it is a barrier to voluntary schemes as well. It means there's an extra step to go through. So that's the basis on agreeing with removing that step.
Thank you. I think the original idea was that it would allow it to become you could bring in, if it was agreed across an industry, you could potentially get rid of the free rider effect by kind of making it compulsory across the sector. But if that's not what's happening, then yeah, I totally understand those concerns. Thank you for that. Moving on to page 67. We support the removal of the current blanket exclusion from the levy for waste to energy facilities. I know that there's been a lot of concern over some time around waste to energy facilities, and they can become quite popular as a solution, but it's can be a bit of a false step. Why would we support the removal of the exclusion?
So at the moment, those facilities do not need to pay a levy, because they are excluded from paying the levy. What we're saying is that those facilities should be viewed the same as landfills, because in the end, you're just providing a end solution. You're just burning the waste, which doesn't actually promote waste minimisation as such, because people, the mindset people could be, well, I can just make as much as I like because it's just going to get burnt in the end. So what we're saying is we support removal of the exclusion, so that their facilities should have a levy, same as landfills.
I was misreading it. I thought it was actually talking about the spending of the levy, but it's actually saying it should be levied. Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Thank you. Just to couple down on 8, changing the time frame for review of the effectiveness of the levy from every 3 years to at least every 5. And I'm guessing that this includes setting the amount, because one of the things when it came in was the idea that the amount would increase over time, and that never really happened. Why would we go for 5 years?
I think it's basically, there has been talks in central government about extending the time frame for parties in central government and whether acts, policies, etc., can actually take effect within a 3-year period. And I think it's along those lines that we need time for changes to take effect. And by extending to 5 years, you're allowing more time for such changes to take effect. Your comment about the amount, I'm actually not sure whether that's taken into account. I don't know. It might be something we'd have to seek clarification on. I don't know whether that includes reviewing the amount of funding. Yeah.
All right, thank you. It's just a minor thing on point 11. I thought some of the arguments under point 11 were in the wrong place. They seem to be answering a different question. So might just want to check that.
Yep, I'll have a look at that. Yep.
And that. Oh, hang on. Well, the only other one I had was around the, on page 71, around the enforcing, like litter control officers being able to enforce offences. And this is a different, this is bringing the litter stuff into it as well. And we've talked about litter officers taking enforcement actions against the owner of a vehicle regardless of who was driving at the time of the offence. In general, I'm cautious about making people liable for the actions of other people, although I understand the difficulty of proving who was driving. I guess that's the argument. I just wanted to test that a little bit.
Yep, you're right. It is a law that's actually been put in place in other countries, proved successful. Doesn't mean to say we have to follow it. Nancy and I were just talking about this. The main problem taking any enforcement action is the issue of proof. We can say a vehicle was involved in fly tipping, etc., but unless we know unless we have proof of someone actually taking the action, a photo, a video, etc., people can just deny it, and there's not a lot we can do. It's whether we actually want to take that step and make the owner of that vehicle responsible, because the owner of that vehicle should know who's driving it, and that is a decision that council can make, whether they actually want to include that in the submission or not.
I'm just wondering if an owner of a vehicle could prove that someone else was driving and that they could become liable for the offence. Because I mean, I don't know, the way it's worded, it would seem I lend someone my car, they do something illegal with it, I'm then liable, even if I can demonstrate that actually they were the one who did it, which seems strong.
We can take that bit out if you like. We can remove that bit from the submission.
I suppose it depends what other councillors think. I mean, I'm just, maybe could we amend it to, that take enforcement against the owners unless they could prove. Because I suppose if you don't have anything in there, it means, well, I've just got to say, it wasn't me driving, and then how do you prove it? But if you say if you say that action can be taken against me unless I can prove that someone else was driving it, it's less of an easy get out of jail card.
We can change it to that. Yep.
Thank you.
Right, Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Hi, Nigel. Morning, Nancy. I'm on page 67 and it's number 10. where we say, do we support limiting the waiver requirement for emergency event situations? We said no. Can you just clarify what that means? I'm not sure if that means, yes, the current status quo is that in an emergency event, or everything goes out the window and you've got authority to make decisions, or whether there's some flexibility in it.
Yeah, I think basically they're actually removing some flexibility by proposing that. So if we look at previous incidents we've had in this district that have created emergency waste, they have not always been declared under one of those acts. So if we just limit it to those acts, it means we could have future incidents that we're not going to get a waiver on. So that's...
Okay, so we're saying yes, keep it. Yeah, we want to be able to do that straight away.
We do, yes.
Okay, thanks.
Mayor Luca.
Waste to energy plants were mentioned. How many do we have in the country?
I don't know.
Well, we have a few.
Yeah, there's a few small ones, but no major big ones from what I understand.
Okay. I just was wondering if there's any recognition of the fact that waste doesn't just go away. All they're doing is converting it to carbon dioxide, which is probably one of the worst wastes that we're making. So I'm not sure. I wouldn't like to see them proliferate. I mean, it's applied to end-of-life tyres, which is burnt in a cement kiln.
Yep.
But you've taken something which is relatively inert and converted it to something which is, extended product responsibility. If in the end, it always comes back on the consumer anyway, I suppose. And we should be doing more in the area of planned obsolescence, where engineers design things to break so they can sell you something else. We've mentioned it, but
yeah, it does always come back to consumer, because basically if a producer has to make changes to their product, they're going to pass on that cost to consumer. But it may make them, if they know they have to recycle that product, then it may make them think more about what they're actually putting in there. Are they using recyclable plastics? Are they using materials that they can pull back and reuse, that sort of thing?
It's a tough one, yeah. Oh, well, thank you.
Thank you. Any further points of clarification? If there's not, we've got two resolutions which are on page 58, and I'll read them out and then call for a mover and a seconder. That the Infrastructure and Planning Committee receive the Waste and Litter Legislation Amendments Submission Report, and two, that the Infrastructure and Planning Committee approve the submission on the proposed amendments to the Waste and Litter Act as attached in Appendix A for submission to central government, subject to some minor corrections. So mover and a seconder, Councillor Tanjos, Councillor Dennis. Any debate? There being none, I'll put the resolution. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Against, carried. Thank you, Nigel. So we'll get this next report in before we have the MP address us. So it's 8.6, Dangerous, Affected and Insanitary Buildings Policy Review. And I welcome Lainey on the Zoom. Welcome, ladies. The floor is yours. And the report's on page 75 to 95.
Through the chair, good morning everyone. We take the report as read. The purpose of the report is for the Infrastructure and Planning Committee to approve the draft Dangerous, Affected and Insanitary Buildings Policy and the statement of proposal for public consultation using the special consultative procedure. Under the Building Act, all councils must adopt a Dangerous, Affected and Insanitary Buildings Policy, which outlines how we manage buildings that are considered dangerous, affected or insanitary. These buildings that may These are buildings that may pose a risk to people's health or safety or could damage neighbouring properties. Council adopted its current policy in 2019, and this must be reviewed every 5 years and amended using the special consultative procedure. In 2014, the Ministry of Business, Innovation and Employment carried out a monitoring assessment of our policy and strongly recommended that we review the policy to ensure alignment with best practice. Staff have taken these recommendations on board. We now pass back to the Chair for any questions.
So Sarah or Lisa, anything to add? Lainey? Right, so...
Not from me, thank you.
Thank you. So, questions of clarification? Anybody? Deputy Mayor?
Thank you, Mr Chair. Good morning, ladies. I was just looking at the title, like dangerous, affected and insanitary. I was just wondering where our earthquake high risk buildings sit. Are they included in here, or is it ones that are dangerous at the moment, not ones that might be dangerous in the future?
Good morning. In 2016, I think it was, we were required to remove the earthquake-prone aspect of this policy, so that sits in a different...
Separate policy. Right,
separate.
thank you.
Any further questions? Councillor Dennis?
Thank you. Thank you for this report. To start, you could just read through it and go, yeah, that's really lovely, but it has a lot of implications, doesn't it? Like, obviously, one of the little pictures you got there is someone cleaning up a fire-damaged building, etc. And I know that we're responsible for all that. But then you get into the whole thing of someone who's been living in his house for a long time, and someone realises that actually the house has got no running water and no toilet, and some of the floors have fallen through the bottom and all that. Are we looking at something like that? With no windows, etc.?
Good morning. So we have done in the past, and I suppose our policy, one of the main changes that we made to align with MB's recommendations was to define our approach, and typically it's a reactive approach, although we can be proactive if we want. It doesn't preclude us from doing that. But we do, on occasion, receive notices of people saying that they think perhaps the building that they're, or the dwelling that they're in is insanitary. And so we have a process that sits under this policy that helps us implement that to kind of define the steps that we would take and who we might engage. So whether it could be the likes of BOP RC if there were septic tank issues or something like that, or with our environmental health team, to kind of have a collaborative approach around how we manage that. And I suppose there are, just in regards to if it was a rental property, there are kind of laws that govern what a rental property has to, sort of the level of, what's it called? Habitability or something of a house and that kind of thing. So yeah, it is something that could fall under this policy, but would tend to collaborate with other departments or other departments or organisations, and how we approach that.
So yes, it is our responsibility that if someone notifies us that someone has got really old and the house is falling down around them and all that sort of stuff, it's our responsibility to go in and work with other agencies to find better accommodation or somehow solve the situation.
Yeah, correct. Under this policy, we're able to look into that and then decide, I guess, how we react, or what steps we can take to help out, or what our obligations are under the Act.
So that obviously then blends into some of the other departments in council, like the building inspectors and things like that, when you look at some people that have come home from overseas or that, and there's no actual houses in their whānau area, and so they convert the local cow shed or they convert something else, and they start developing it and it doesn't quite work. So we're responsible for that too?
Yeah, so it could fall under this policy, but there are other sections of the Building Act that would allow us to look into those buildings that were maybe being used for not the purpose that they were actually permitted or consented to be used for, whether they were unconsented building work that we might need to address with the owner of the property.
It seems like today's agenda is full of all these impossible situations. Okay, thank you.
Thanks.
I don't think it's all that bad, Councillor. Anyway, Deputy Mayor, Councillor Tajos.
Thank you, and thanks for this report. Just following on from Councillor Dennis, really. So I think it's good that we're taking a primarily complaints-based approach, although we can proactively investigate if we think it warrants it. It also says something along the lines of taking a proportionate approach, which I think is good. I'm just wondering if someone feels like we're being disproportionate or overly unnecessarily pedantic, how do they question us as to our proportionality?
I suppose to put that in context, since 2017 we've issued 5 dangerous, affected or insanitary building notices. So it's not a policy, I guess it's something in our everyday work. I don't know if we've been challenged on our approach in regards to identifying those buildings as being D, A or I. In regards to that, I suppose Council has a complaints process, my team has one as well, and within that we have a framework as to how we kind of manage those complaints. So although it's not disclosed in the policy, I would take a reasonable approach and take that same kind of approach.
So people had kind of escalated, I suppose.
Yeah.
Right.
And I mean, in regards to if they're unhappy with the decision we've made, they can always go to MB for a determination or something like that if they don't feel that we've made the correct, I mean, that would be the last step. Hopefully we could resolve it before that, but yeah, there are those methods, yeah.
Deputy Mayor.
Thank you. I'm on page 92, which was, I appreciate that we have to go out to consultation as per the government. So that's good, but when I have a quick read of that, to go back to my earlier assumption of why earthquakes were excluded, perhaps we need to include something in here to say excluding earthquakes. And then we might also, because my follow-up question to that was, why was earthquake-prone building safety taken out in 2016? Like, was that also a government thing because of the EEC?
Yeah, there was an Amendment Act in 2016 that required us to include, I think, affected buildings into this policy and enabled us to remove the earthquake prone.
Okay.
What we can do though is, although we have an earthquake prone building policy that defines how we, what's it called? How we determine whether a building is potentially earthquake prone or is earthquake prone. If we were to have an earthquake, I would imagine we would probably declare a state of emergency, and there's a different method of classifying buildings in their danger. We can still use this policy to say this building is dangerous resulting from an earthquake, whereas the earthquake-prone building policy is to, I guess, identify buildings that are potentially or earthquake-prone, and then strengthening that or whatever the requirements are in that time frame. So it's slightly different. Yeah, that's more of a prone, and this would be is it dangerous, regardless of how it's resulted, but depending on whether we're in a state of emergency or just BAU.
Thank you. I just think it'd be worth mentioning because otherwise people will jump to that.
Yeah,
and my second question was, what sort of feedback are we going to expect from the community that would change anything?
Yeah, I wouldn't imagine much. This policy's, although we've tweaked it a bit, and all we've done really is take away some of the duplication, defined our approach and sort of tidied it up a bit. It's not a high-profile policy, I don't think, and like I say, we've issued 5 in the last 7 or so years. It's not, I wouldn't think we would get a lot, but who knows.
All right, thank you.
So if there's no further points of clarification, we've got the resolutions. There's 3 of them on page 75, and I'll read them out and then ask for a mover and seconder. That the Infrastructure and Planning Committee receives the Dangerous, Affected and Insanitary Buildings Policy Review Report, and that the Infrastructure and Planning Committee approve the draft Dangerous, Affected and Insanitary Buildings Policy as attached in Appendix 1 for public consultation using the special consultative procedure in accordance with the requirements of the Building Act 2004 and Local Government Act 2002 and 3. that the Infrastructure and Planning Committee approve the statement of proposal as attached in Appendix 2. So mover and a seconder, please. Councillor James and Deputy Mayor Emick. Is there any debate? If there is none, I'll put the motion. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Against? Carried. Thank you, team. Okay, so while we just wait for Simon and team to come in, Mayor Lucas is going to introduce. Yeah, they're here, so it's... No. Make sure you've got a mic. Sharice, will you just tell them how they did it? And I'll ask Mayor Luca to do the introduction.
Well, it's my pleasure to welcome Simon Court, Honourable Simon Court, and his companion / minder, Cameron Luxton. Simon has got a formation as a civil and environmental engineer. He's worked 20 years in both public and private sectors. And now he's decided to move to the dark side where we are, which is politics. He is the Under-Secretary for Infrastructure and RMA Reform, which is very pertinent to many of the challenges we have. And you're also the ACT spokesperson for climate change.
That's right.
So, Simon, I'm going to leave it to you and play it how you like.
Well, thank you very much for this opportunity to meet with you and to share some of the work that I've been doing and the aspirations this government has around infrastructure funding and financing and resource management reform. I'm also really interested to get your questions and take away some insights, because I do recognise that the opportunities for engagement around some of the things we're working on are often not sufficient in terms of the time we get to spend with each other to really spend that quality time. So look, let's make the most of it. In terms of the work that I'm doing on infrastructure funding and financing, in the past year I've delivered an updated public-private partnership policy, which essentially sets out when the government wants to work with the private sector to finance and deliver major projects, how do we make it work better for the government partner, as well as make the risks for those entering into the PPP project, the designers and the constructors, far easier to manage, so we actually do get better value. I've worked on strategic leasing and market-led proposals, just to help flesh out some of the options for not just central government, but also local government in terms of how we get the private sector involved in infrastructure investment. And right now I'm working on a refresh of the Infrastructure Funding and Financing Act, which is a tool that allows councils, but what we're hoping in the future is also developers to lead the delivery and financing of the infrastructure they need to enable housing and commercial development, whereas currently a lot of this is held up essentially because councils are capital constrained and often resource constrained. You've only got so many contractors who can do things in an area. When it comes to the resource management reform, today we're announcing a new national policy statement for infrastructure, because while the RMA does provide for protecting the natural environment and values around those things that we all find special and significant, cultural values and landscape values, there's nothing in the top parts of the RMA that guide planners and decision makers that say, guess what infrastructure is important too? So we're releasing a national policy statement today, a new one, which guides decision makers on how to view infrastructure applications and better balance them against the need to protect the environment. And of course, the big kahuna, the big monster at the end of this political video game is replacing the Resource Management Act with a system based on property rights. So look, there's a bit of an overview. I'm happy to go into more detail. How about I just run through some of the things that we want to do in some of those policy areas, and then we flip into Q&A, because again, I'm really interested in hearing your questions and getting your insights through that process. And just checking in, Mr. Chair, or Your Worship, how much time have we got?
He's the chair on
The Worship. Well, thank you very much. I do appreciate that. So in terms of the Infrastructure Funding and Financing Act, why don't we start with the infrastructure side of things? I've been working alongside Minister Bishop in terms of how do we get the infrastructure delivered in response to demand, because too often we've looked at infrastructure as a constrained supply of infrastructure, which constrains our ability to service housing and new commercial land, and that essentially is the responsibility of councils to deliver. And we know that they don't have enough revenue tools with which to pay for what they need to provide. And if we follow the Going for Housing Growth mantra that Minister Bishop is promoting, growth should pay for growth. So you shouldn't have all the other residents and ratepayers of the district paying for the new developments infrastructure or what you need to enable it. And some people think we should build up, some build out, but we can actually get, wherever we grow, we're going to need to better align the costs of growth with the benefits of growth. And under the changes we're proposing to the Infrastructure Funding and Financing Act, we're actually going to let the market or demand signal where growth can go, in addition to councils planning for where they want growth to happen. General rating has its place, but it doesn't tie the cost of provisioning infrastructure to the decisions people make, which is often why things get distorted. And we know there's several other tools available, like targeted rates, new development levies, which are coming, but the Infrastructure Funding and Financing Act involves it's a special purpose vehicle to finance infrastructure needed to enable development, which is repaid by the properties that are levied, the properties that benefit. And this is all off council's balance sheets. So it enables councils to continue doing the things that they were planning to do with the revenues they had planned for, and allows developers or council, if they choose to use this tool, to add to, rather than having to make this trade-off between projects that ratepayers can fund. It was actually born out of a market innovation success story, the Milldale development north of Auckland, where the developers proposed to build the bulk infrastructure that Auckland's council and CCOs weren't ready to, and do it so that they could get the housing development open sooner, and so the benefits of that additional housing and the benefits of having people living closer to places of work in Silverdale and industrial areas north of Auckland could be realised sooner. Yet while it was intended to codify this initial innovation and to replicate the success, unfortunately, like a lot of things government does, by trying to manage every single risk in the deal-making system, it made it very, very difficult and expensive for councils to participate, which is why we haven't seen many. And recently, Hamilton City Council declined to progress their Infrastructure Funding and Financing Act deal. It was simply they saw the transaction costs and being too high. So we've heard about the problems and we're making changes. We're going to extend the ability to use these kind of special purpose vehicles to the likes of NZTA and KiwiRail, so that bigger projects that enable growth, while this type of arrangement isn't going to pay for all of the project, it is another essentially slice of capital that can be stacked up by the project proponents in order to get it financed and get it underway. And it will require the levies, though, to be approved by councils, for example, when these deals are proposed. It's actually going to remove council's ability to veto them. So we're having to look at some of the trade-offs there. So, for example, if a developer in NZTA wants to build a new interchange or build some bulk infrastructure, rather than councils having the final say, they'll get to have input to make sure that what's proposed is compatible with their infrastructure or their long-term plans, but we're going to remove the ability for councils to veto them. So that's an important thing to consider as we work through the legislative process, and no doubt you'll have views on that. But it's going to enable the use of development levies as well, rather than development contributions, meaning that a lot of things that previously developers would say, well, crikey, in Auckland we're faced with $100,000 per unit as a development contribution. If those development contributions can essentially be bulk funded through raising finance and then having those property owners pay it off over a longer period of time, then that upfront cost of the development contribution is smoothed out over the time. You might think those assets would be delivered and become used. So we think it's a fairer way to do things. It's going to unlock new opportunities and reset the provision of infrastructure to make sure we get better infrastructure delivered on budget and on time, because of course if you're the financiers putting up the money, you're going to want to know that the contractors, the designers and contractors are going to deliver it, on time and on budget when you've got private finance on the line. So we think it's going to make infrastructure much more responsive to demand than it has been now, and including where developers want to lead, rather than leaving it all up to councils to have to plan and budget to provision this infrastructure. So I'll just quickly run through our resource management reform proposal, and then we'll get into Q&A. So tools like infrastructure funding and financing improvements, that's going to help make a dent in the infrastructure and housing deficit, but it doesn't actually address this elephant in the room, which sees about $1.3 billion every year spent by infrastructure and other proponents on trying to get consents. That is an extraordinary amount of money that could otherwise be allocated or largely allocated to actually building the things we need, or potentially building them in a more affordable way. We spend well over the OECD average on infrastructure, but we're in the bottom 10% of developed countries in terms of bang for buck, what we actually get for that amount of money we spend. And a large part of the problem is the Resource Management Act, which means we're taking much longer to get consents for the things that we will inevitably need and build. and the consent conditions around them have become far too complex to respond to and administer. And that's why Cabinet has agreed on the shape of new replacement legislation, which is signalling, to be fair, compared to the status quo, what will be quite a radical transition to a far more liberal planning system with less red tape and premised on the enjoyment of property rights. And people ask what that means. Well, we can get into that. But essentially it's two acts: a planning act focused on regulating the use, development and enjoyment of land, and along with a natural environment act focused on the use, protection and enhancement of the natural environment. The reason for two acts is because the Resource Management Act attempted to integrate environmental management and land use and development. And while that was a laudable approach at the time when that was first conceived in the late 1980s, what we know now is that it is far too heavily weighted towards environmental protection and gives far too many people and organisations the ability to object to things, and often, while they might be well-intentioned, the type of consent conditions and responses from planners and decision makers has been overly cautious and has led us to essentially the Resource Management Act tying up our need for housing and infrastructure and red tape. So we're going to narrow the scope of matters that the planning and resource management system deals with. We're going to narrow what we consider to be material effects. For example, effects that are borne solely by the landowner or the homeowner, like the interior matters like the interior building layouts or exterior aspects of buildings that have no impact on neighbouring properties, like the size or configuration of apartments, whether there's a balcony or not, or the configuration of outdoor spaces. They're going to be up to the developer and the person purchasing that property. That's a private matter that's going to be excluded from the new system. And so will matters such as trade competition, where previously someone said, well, you shouldn't be allowed to open a new shopping mall up the road because it might take business away from the main street. But if we keep saying no to people, there'll be fewer places for people to work, and we just won't grow our wealth as a community and as a nation. So we're going to exclude trade competition from the new system. We're going to start with a presumption that land use is enabled unless there's an impact on the ability of others to use their own land or on the natural environment. It's just going to reduce the range of effects being regulated. We're going to simplify national direction. We're going to have one set of national policy direction under each act to simplify, streamline and direct local government planners and decision makers in the system. And direction under the Natural Environment Act will cover things like freshwater, Indigenous biodiversity and coastal policy. And direction under the Planning Act will cover urban development, infrastructure, including renewable energy and natural hazards. We're going to have a nationally standardised set of land use zones, which will provide significant system benefits and efficiencies. There's going to be a greater standardisation for the controls on development and environmental matters. And, just think back to my work as a civil engineer. The number of times I had to get consents for working in a watercourse or earthworks, and when you look at the consent conditions, every time the processing planner would think, crikey, or better add a couple more conditions just to cover everything off, and it just got more and more difficult to do the same activity with no actual benefit to the environment. So having national standards to regulate a whole lot of things that we do every day in New Zealand. 40,000 consents or so were issued in 2022 at the peak of the last building boom. Most of them for things that we already know how to do well, and all of that can be standardised to some extent to reduce the need for consents. We're going to introduce environmental limits to provide more certainty around where development can and should be enabled, but also more certainty around those places and spaces and values in the environment which must be protected. Human health risks don't vary across the country, so these should be set nationally, but we do believe that the regions should have the option to choose the environmental limits that are most appropriate for the places they want to protect, but also that are most appropriate for the activities that they want to enable in their region. We're going to have a range of tools, so the right tools are available for the right job in the new system. We're really interested in how new arrangements, such as catchment group arrangements, market-based mechanisms, and having a very limited role for consenting where plans and national standards don't adequately cover off things that we do all the time. Spatial planning, each region's going to be required to have a spatial plan focused on identifying sufficient urban development areas, and where those areas are prioritised for public investment, we want to see where the infrastructure is going to go in corridors. You might have existing infrastructure like your fantastic port here that connects Whakatane and Bay of Plenty with coastal waters. You want to see those things shown on a spatial plan so that in future, if you might want to redevelop them or upgrade them or do new things there, that you don't have to go back to square one to prove to an environment court why you should be allowed to do something, because guess what, it's already there. It's going to provide a longer focus into the future, not just for infrastructure, but also where are those places in the natural environment that we want to protect and where there are hazards that we want to identify for the future, so that we don't build more things in harm's way if we can avoid it. We're going to shift from, and this is, I think, important when people say, well, we do a lot at the moment to understand environmental effects and effects on communities through the consenting process. What's going to happen when we're not doing this as much? Well, we're going to have a much stronger environmental compliance and enforcement regime, because that's one thing that I hear a lot about in my role, and I certainly experience when working for some of the top engineering and construction companies in New Zealand, who do things properly, that often they're looking around and they're saying, hey, there's people out here getting away with stuff in the environment that they shouldn't be. So we're going to have a much stronger environmental compliance monitoring and enforcement regime in the new legislation. We're going to have a national compliance regulator with a regional presence. That is a function currently performed by regional councils. We haven't got to a point of taking decisions or detailed policy decisions about how that's going to happen, but MFE is doing some really good work in that space, informed by the existing environmental data that we've got. A couple more things I want to cover off, and then we'll get to Q&A. One is, how are we going to achieve this transition? Because there was a transition from the Town and Country Planning Act in 1991 to the RMA, and while with the best of intentions, the new legislation was put in place and the government of the day said, off you go, this is going to be much better, isn't it? It turned out that a lot of the behaviours, a lot of the problems with the Town and Country Planning Act and the Water and Soil Conservation Act and those other things that the RMA was supposed to solve didn't really get solved because the behaviours never changed. That's why we're going to introduce a planning tribunal into the new system as an accountability mechanism. We envisage a couple of roles for it. One is to resolve disputes between neighbours about what's allowed where. Of course, standardised zoning will help take a lot of political pressure off councils. If we say, look, here's your Lego box full of standardised zones, these are defensible at a national level. Councils don't have to go out and defend the particular provisions of a zone, or they might have to explain why they've chosen certain types of zones in certain areas. But we want disputes between neighbours about what's allowed to be resolved through a planning tribunal mechanism. Currently, the Environment Court is far too expensive to access for matters that people are concerned about and they want to be able to have a decision on. And we also want the planning tribunal to have the power to strike out unlawful demands for consent, because what we do know is that in the new system there will be people potentially involved in regulatory planning, I would say, who might say, look, the new system might say this is how it's done now, but I'm still really concerned about this effect that I used to have the powers to regulate, and I think I'm going to issue a consent condition for something actually I'm not allowed to issue a consent for under the current system, but I'm going to do it anyway. And that's why we want a planning tribunal to be there to actually act as an arbiter, an accountability mechanism. We think it's a really important part of the culture change that's necessary, because we think that decision makers and regulators faced with being taken to the planning tribunal for imposing a consent condition that is essentially ultra vires or potentially could be, they're going to think twice about it. We want to make sure there's a front-loaded and really certain role for Māori in the new system to meet the Crown's obligations and to fulfil and uphold existing treaty settlements. The RMA has often left Māori engagement vague, particularly to applicants who are not involved in the system all the time. And in the reform system, we intend that the Crown's obligations to Māori under the Treaty of Waitangi that are currently expressed in a number of ways, sections 6, 7 and 8 of the RMA, are going to be clarified. There's going to be participation mechanisms at key decision points, particularly in spatial planning, to make sure that we recognise cultural values, wahi tapu, and also a clearly signalled interest that Māori have in the natural environment and protecting and upholding values. So we are thinking that should be through the environmental limit setting process. Like, what are the limits appropriate to certain places in the environment around fresh water, coastal, for example, and making sure that Māori values are expressed in that way. It's going to reduce the reliance on the ad hoc cultural impact assessments, which have been required during consenting processes, where often councils have felt that in order to fulfil their obligations under the RMA, asking applicants for cultural impact assessments, even for things which you might say, well, okay, is there really a direct impact on culture here, or is council just ticking a box? We're going to try to reduce that as far as practical, while recognising that there are some treaty settlements that still provide expressly for Māori participation in the detailed planning and consenting processes for certain matters. And so, look, what I'll do is, I can see I've probably gone on a little bit longer than I've intended, and I hope I haven't used up too much space for questions. But if you have time available, I'm happy to take a few questions.
Thank you, Simon, and we've got the time because you've taken the time to come and see us, and we appreciate it. I probably should have also advised you that we are live streaming this meeting as well, so...
Well, in my job, I just assume every mic is hot mic, so thank you.
So anyway, that's where we are. So look, with the questions, I think what we'll do is we'll just go round the room, starting with Councillor Boynton, and we'll all have a turn, I think, and that'd be the way to deal with that. So, Councillor Boynton.
Tēnā kōrua, me atu ki a koe, ki a kōrua, nau mai hara mai, ki te kaunihera o whakatāne. Ai, tuku mihi atu ki a koe mō tō kōrero i tēnei rā, mō tō kaha, mō tō kaupapa o a tātou ture. So just wanting to acknowledge you both for coming all the way from Wellington to Whakatāne and to talk to us about things that are really impact the way in which we do business and what we will be doing in the future. Very, very key act. So I just wanted to acknowledge it and thank you, even though personally I may not agree with some of the stuff, but your government, you have a role to play. We have mahi that we need to get done for our communities, and that's the most important thing. I did have a range of questions, but overall, I guess when you had presented a while ago around the housing development and the infrastructure, there were certain pillars, and there was the first pillars that sort of focused on urban growth and that, and I suppose it seemed like that we fell into the third pillar. And just wanted to know, what does that mean? Because you mentioned quite a bit about being able to instigate development and growth and making it easier for infrastructure to be paid for and stuff like that. And it seems to be focusing on urban or more intensified development. How does that play out for our region?
So there'll be many regions around the country, like this community in Whakatāne, which are going to have development pressures. There'll be people who might want to retire here. There'll be people who say, what a fantastic lifestyle, we'd love to live there, but we can't find a new home, the kind of home we want. And often that will be limited by the infrastructure that you have. Do you have an ageing out wastewater treatment plant? Do you have pipes that might have been laid in, peaty soils back in the 1960s and 70s are going to need to be renewed. So I think it's really important to recognise that that your rating base is still going to be the primary source of income for the maintenance and renewal of your existing assets. But that if you are thinking about a new subdivision being consented, potentially you've got, you might have a new health facility or new schools that are going to be consented, and they're putting an additional load on the system, then you need to be able to link that cost of upgrading that infrastructure back to those properties that benefit, and make sure that, in the development levies system, which we're going to be introducing in the future, while that might be a significant cost to provision that land, that you do recover it. And that, through a development levy system rather than a one-off upfront development contribution, it's actually going to be spread over a longer period of time. Potentially you might choose to spread it over, 10 or 15 or 20 years, in which case you're going to have that entry level for the housing is going to be, that entry price is going to be cheaper than it otherwise would be. So the primary responsibility for provisioning infrastructure for your existing urban area will sit with the ratepayers, but for what comes next, it's going to have to, and that is additional, it's going to have to be sheeted back to those who benefit, to the property developers and the future property owners.
Okay, just following up from that. So are you sort of saying that the property developers or the council are able to sort of, I guess, borrow into the future or have some kind of way to be able to have that infrastructure put in place, and that ultimately will that impact on the costs and pricing of those houses for those people who end up purchasing them?
Yeah, it certainly will. Nobody should expect to rock up to do a subdivision or a property development and get their infrastructure paid for by existing ratepayers.
Yeah.
That's just not fair. And it's also not recognising that the existing ratepayers have, many cases, are already going to face an additional cost burden to renew and replace and upgrade the infrastructure that they've been using for the past, 30, 40, 50 years, which in many cases in a lot of provincial areas around New Zealand has aged out. So we're actually facing a bow wave, an infrastructure deficit. It's real, and that's why Bishop and I are absolutely clear that growth must pay for growth, separately to what councils need to recover from existing ratepayers to pay for the stuff they've already got.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
So just before Councillor Dennis, just be mindful that we've got the room to go round, so when you're asking your questions, thanks. Councillor Dennis.
Thank you, and thank you, Minister, for coming to visit us.
Future Minister, but thank you.
Well, I was just talking about the future. Thank you for coming to visit us. My one is obviously in your future plans, it's all about rejigging how we take money off the residents, and we're already one of the highest rated people in the country, and we only have 17,000 ratepayers with a number of small Māori communities and villages which environmentally are suffering from no reticulated system. So that's one issue. But if you look at the wider infrastructure, we have a state highway 2 that goes from Gisborne through the gorge to Apotiki, through another gorge to Whakatane, and up to the ports of Tauranga. Gisborne sent a lot of traffic that way. The East Cape sent a lot of their produce that way. We've got an old railway bridge called Pikatahi Bridge, which is single lane, was a railway bridge too. The rail's gone, but the bridge is there, and it's just an absolute dog. In regard to that big type of infrastructure, you're talking about enabling NZTA to access more money to do that. Are you able to say with clarity how that will be affected for us, for the route security, not only from Hawke's Bay, Gisborne, Potiki, Whakatane to Tauranga, given the fact that Gisborne Council is still struggling to repair their bridges and can't struggle to get their produce up, is there a future plan for that, please?
Yeah, well, I mean, this is the rub of it. We actually don't have enough money to pay for all the stuff we want to. So when you look at NZTA's budget, the difference between what we're collecting in fuel excise duty and the commitments that we know we have to make to infrastructure, not just the major urban infrastructure, but to the regions, rebuilding infrastructure in Hawke's Bay and Tairāwhiti after Cyclone Gabrielle. There's a massive burden on the communities there, but also on taxpayers around the country. I understand there's some long overdue improvements to the Waiheke Gorge and taking out some of the gnarly hairpin corners down there and dealing with some of the areas that are subject to frequent slips. So that should provide for a greater resilience in that part of the network. This old rail bridge you've described is, maybe we'll have a look at it today if we've got time. Cam and I can, if we're heading that direction. But look, we just need to be, really clear that we don't have enough money to pay for stuff. What's listed in the National Land Transport Plan and what your Regional Land Transport Plan has already agreed to, if we can deliver that at least cost no frills, then that could leave more money for what we need to do next. One of the challenges that NZTA has is that they're really nice guys and gals, and they keep saying yes to people, and yes to environmental benefits, and yes to this community, and yes to that, without actually really recognising whether they're going to be able to afford all the things they've said yes to. So I'd have the answers to a specific problem about your rail overbridge, but we're going to need to find more money. So in the future, we're going to be looking at moving to a road user charges system, electronic or paper-based, moving away from fuel excise duty. That's in the coalition agreement and in this government's work program. We're going to need to increase the amount that road users are paying for the roads if we want more roads. We also have to consider, and it's been floated previously, in the media, recycling some assets. Why would we continue owning electricity assets if there's billions and billions of dollars of capital we can use to recycle into infrastructure in the regions? So they did that in Australia successfully. They have bipartisan support for doing that across their Labor and centre right equivalent governments. They don't argue about it. They're like, what could we sell so we can put the money into the stuff we need now? So we're going to have to. We've got a lot of tough choices to face, but probably best we litigate that through the next election, between now and the next election, and see where we land after 2026.
Councillor James.
Yeah, thanks gentlemen for coming, and it's great to have the opportunity to be able to talk to you and ask questions. Just going back to the development levy, I've got 3 questions. One of them is, who funds the levy? Is that government funded or privately funded? Second question is, the levies, do you see them affecting the purchasers of the properties and their ability to borrow when they've got this extra levy over their head? And what would be the expected life of the levy?
So that's all in the details of the scheme, but let's be clear, banks now are asking people what brand of cat food they buy. So no doubt they'll also be interested in what other encumbrances there are on a property that a purchaser is looking at. But I think it's only fair that if infrastructure is costing millions or tens of millions of dollars to provision, that those who benefit pay for it. The question is over what time frame. So if your infrastructure has got a design life of 50 to 100 years, then it wouldn't be unreasonable to say your levy period to repay that infrastructure could be in the region of 15 to 25, 30 years. Of course, the longer your repayment period is, the greater your financing costs. These are all trade-offs that need to be made. One of your question was, you said who's going to fund it? Actually, I think the question is who's going to finance it. So potentially the developers could finance it under a special purpose vehicle. That's what the Infrastructure Funding and Financing Act allows for. We've got the National Infrastructure Funding and Financing Company, used to be called CIP. They were the ones who did the finance arrangements for the fibre rollout. They're involved in trying to right-size deals for communities ranging, because currently there's no real private capital isn't really that interested in doing deals for less than $300 or $400 million. That's just a fact. Our Kiwi savers, our pension plans, overseas investors are not interested in anything smaller than that. In fact, unless it's got $1 billion on the end of it, they're not really that interested. So NIFCO, National Infrastructure Fund and Financing Company, is looking at how they might aggregate up packages, in the $50 million range, and it might be a few different developments around a region that aggregate up into a finance package. So we're really looking at how we get the efficiencies, how we get the private sector capital involved, and make sure that the deals make financial sense, because you don't want to end up with basically taking out an interest-only type loan on an infrastructure where you are actually buying a real asset. So look, the devil's in the detail, but that's one of the things I'm working through with Ministry of Housing and Urban Development officials and Minister Bishop to make sure we get it right, so these things are accessible, and that we don't come back in 10 years' time and you say, well, you've made these changes, but the deals that were available or the deals that we were offered still weren't affordable. We have to sort this out. Yeah.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Councillor O'Brien.
Tēnā kōrua tino, nei mai ramai te rohe nei o Ngāti Awa. Ngā mea hoki kia kōrua ko tā mai te whakawhiti kōrero i a tātou e tēnei ro. Just a question on, two gentlemen, there's an emphasis on urban development. And we're looking at RMA reforms, looking at national policy statements for freshwater management and changes in this. What hurts us on the ground over here in the Rangitaki Plains is the national policy statement for highly productive land.
Yeah.
We can't build on our own whenua. People are work for 50 years, they buy lifestyle blocks, they want to break them into 1 hectare blocks and say, here, my children, this retained in general land so you can borrow off it, but highly productive land says, we can't do it. How can you help us? The HPL is hurting us.
Well,
it's not so much for rural development. It's just...
We hear this all around the country. I was from Southland. We heard from an international investor that wants to build a data centre right underneath the high transmission power lines. And they've been told by the local council down there, you can't build this $1 billion data centre because it's highly productive land. It's currently growing turnips. It makes no sense whatsoever. And of course, saying if people who need housing and they own the land or they have access to land and they can build housing units on it, to be told that actually growing grass or growing a crop is more important than your welfare, that's completely ridiculous. So I understand that changes are going to be progressed to the highly productive land national policy statement. In fact, I think while we're in here, Ministers Bishop and Macleay and some of the others, Hoggard, are actually in the process of announcing some of those changes, which I wouldn't want to get out ahead of myself, but I think you're going to see some positive changes there. And then what we need to do in the replacement of the resource management system is make sure that that human welfare component can provide the unlocking mechanism to get over that highly productive land control. There are many people in our communities who are really concerned. They don't want to see the best land in New Zealand flattened for houses. But you know what? I think we're going to be okay when it comes to food growing. We grow enough food to feed 40 million people around the world. I'm pretty sure if we let some people, set up in Papakainga or in new housing development around here, we wouldn't see the price of cabbages go up in the supermarket. So I think we can solve this, and I hope you'll see some benefits in the changes that are going to be announced today. More to come.
Thank you very much.
Kia ora.
Councillor Dukes.
Thank you and welcome. Just when you were talking about transition and you were talking about the planning tribunal, you mentioned about neighbours' disputes going to this tribunal. There must be a level that you're talking about for these disputes, because it wouldn't just be two neighbours arguing over the fence height or something like that. So could you just elaborate a little bit more about that?
I'm expecting that it will be on matters around infringements. So, for example, if you've got an urban zone which says you're allowed to build a two-storey house, and there'll be some standardised rules around setbacks or height to boundary, and somebody says, you know what, if I could just get a little bit closer to the boundary, I could maybe fit in a garage alongside the house. If that creates an infringement, then there's got to be a way to unlock that so that the neighbour who feels that their property rights are being infringed on can say, you know what, I don't really like it. But that the person who wants to do the development can still find a pathway through. And if neighbours can't come to a private agreement, then they can go off to the planning tribunal to say, actually, it's not unreasonable that person shifts their house another half a metre closer to the boundary on the basis that they provide some compensation or recognition to the neighbour. Where you can't come to a private agreement, I think that's where the planning tribunal is going to be really helpful.
Yeah, so it was just, my concern was just over the level of what would be going to that planning tribunal, taking away from what we as the council would deal with under our district plan. So, I mean, it would seem silly to be having everything going to that planning tribunal, whereas what you're talking about seems to be more about development and allowing more development, so somewhere in there needing to have that sort of definition and clarity for councils to know what we rule on and what we don't. So
yeah, and I think it's really important, and I should have made it clearer in my initial comments, that councils will have the right to plan, that the tools available to them will be more limited in scope in the matters that councils can make rules for, but councils will have the right to plan. You'll get to sit around this table and you'll get to vote on your new plan under the replacement legislation. But for people who want to do things that infringe a rule in the plan or a nationally standardised zone, there's got to be an unlocking mechanism for people to do things that slightly infringe where there's an effect on the neighbour. We're reasonable people, but sometimes you might think your neighbour's being a bit unreasonable. Well, they've got rights too, and that's where we think the planning tribunal is the right place. People can't come to their own private agreement. They shouldn't come and moan and whinge to you as elected members. They shouldn't come and moan and whinge to the front desk. They should have a place to go where they can resolve those disputes.
Hey, Luca?
Well, I was going to ask the HPL question as well, but Councillor O'Brien has done it. That natural tension between private property rights and HPL, because we suffer that quite a bit around here. We've almost got no land for residential development or industrial for that matter. It's mostly HPL. But I'll change tack, and the government and yourselves are also talking about private capital to fund public infrastructure. I would rather have public capital be used for public infrastructure, because aren't you actually just doing a wealth transfer? I mean, government debt's not the same as private debt. Government spending creates the money necessary to roll out infrastructure, which is real value. So this obsession with private being better, where I see no proof of that anywhere. You talked about public-private partnerships, and I was in Australia when they introduced them. They were a failure. I guess the good example of how they don't work was Transmission Gully. I mean, the private partner gets into it to reduce their risks, and then they've got the backstop of having the government behind them. So that's a good method of reducing risk. And then when there are cost overruns, they come screaming to who? The public purse. So this issue that the private sector does things better, I'm not so sure about. Maybe you can talk to that.
Certainly can. Thank you for raising all of those objections that we hear so often to the engagement of private capital in the delivery of public infrastructure. So firstly, private capital is additional to public capital. Public capital basically means the money that the government takes off taxpayers and has available to allocate to CapEx. This year it's about $6.7 billion. We have a $200 billion infrastructure deficit. We have $100 billion of projects that are proposed to be funded from public capital between now and, say, 2030, mid-2030s. There's another $100 billion worth of stuff we don't have the money for. So the question is, are we going to be limited by the capital that we can raise from taxpayers, or are we going to seek additional capital so we can build more stuff, get those infrastructure benefits early, while still insisting that for most of those assets, they actually are in public ownership? What we're doing is we're using private finance. And we're actually, and when we come to Transmission Gully, I think you've raised a great example, we're actually using the private sector to design, construct, operate and maintain for a certain period of time when it comes to a PPP. And the risk should sit with the private sector. The problem with the PPP arrangements we've had is that they actually date back to the early 2000s. The contract model that we have is entirely unsuited for the way things actually get built in the difficult tiger country like Transmission Gully type of environments, where sometimes some changes actually should be sheeted back to the client. When Transmission Gully was being built, we had the Kaikoura earthquake. Yeah, it revealed a whole lot of seismic faults and risks that weren't known at the time the job was priced and designed. So how on earth is the constructor and designer supposed to take on risks like that? What we've done with the update to the PPP policy has been very clear that there should be a methodology for working out which risks sit with which party, which risks actually it makes a lot more sense for the government on behalf of the taxpayer to control, and which risks, like delivery on time, materials quality, making sure that the road is open, every hour of the day, all facing penalties. Just come to Australia. I was in Australia last year in November and visited a series of PPP schools in Queensland. Queensland's been run by a Labor government for a very long time. It's only just changed to a centre-right government. They have no objection whatsoever to procuring their public schools through PPP, because when the light bulb and the projector goes out, as one teacher told me, they scan it, they open the app, scan it, say what the fault is, they get a message back immediately saying what time the technician will be there to replace that bulb. I mean, I can't imagine a system like that working in the public sector education system that we have now. So look, there are some real benefits to getting the private sector involved, but on the basis that it adds to what we can deliver with public capital. It's not instead of, and it's at a price and with the risk allocated fairly, so that we don't end up in a situation where we socialise all of the costs onto the taxpayer and the private sector gets the benefit. What we've set up, with with strategic leasing and the PPP refresh, and what we're going to do with the Infrastructure Funding and Financing Act changes is going to make it clear that there has to be a net benefit to the taxpayer, to the government, to the council, to the public sector infrastructure operator if we're going to use those tools.
Yeah, thank you for that. I could have lots of follow-ups, but I'll wait till I get you on your own. Thanks.
Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and good morning, Simon and Karen. I just want to acknowledge you being the ACT MP for Tauranga with the construction and farming background as well.
Thank you. I'm the ACT MP, listed MP based in Tauranga.
Okay.
And the farming, definitely construction and farming was in Galatea, just for the note of the council. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you for that, Lindsay.
I can say with that the rest of the team would have had a little bit of a quiet grin when they're only allowed to ask one question, because I'm normally that councillor that's already got 20 questions lined up. So I thought I did have an intake of breath and seeing how we're going to go around the room. But I thought I would share something with you rather than ask a question, because some of the questions have already been asked. And this is about Māori wards. Now, our community is 50-50 pretty much, with Māori and with non-Māori. And we've had Māori ward councillors, so we've got there in the room, Councillor Boynton, Councillor O'Brien and Councillor Angiaho online. And I'm only a second-term councillor. I don't know if a longer-term councillor could explain it better. But the value of having Māori ward councillors in our community is immense. They bring their networks, they bring their education, they bring their tikanga around the table, and it filters and threads itself all the way through the whole organisation. And when I came on council in 2019, we've got 7 to 8 iwi in our local district, and there was some tensions between them all. And I think we're now at the point with the leadership and with our Māori ward councillors sharing their knowledge around the table, of being in a really good position going forward with working with our iwi. Now, Councillor Isles and I also whakapapa Māori, but we weren't brought up on the marae and we weren't brought up with all the tikanga. So this argument of how everyone has the same starting point is actually not true. I can't speak on behalf of any of the local iwi because I don't even whakapapa to this iwi. And I don't have that tikanga-based knowledge. And it actually, it's quite offensive that with the Māori War Bill that's going through, that you're taking the control out of the local councils and putting it through to a referendum.
Well, I mean, I think you raised some really good points, and I think it's really important to acknowledge that, you know, that the members around the table are all elected and do represent their communities, and I'm sure, you know, I'm positive that the benefits you've described are correct. So one of the challenges we've got in New Zealand is that there's a sense that in local government, sometimes decisions are being made by those who are appointed rather than elected. And so that has caused some consternation, and we have to address that. I think the purpose of putting we just go back and look back to when the provision of Maori wards was left up to councils alone rather than requiring a referendum. That was something that was proposed and passed under urgency by the previous Labour government, guided by local government minister at the time, Honourable Nanaia Mahuta. The current government's parties, National and ACT, were in Parliament, and we opposed that. And you know, it was a coalition commitment to restore the system to what it was before Labour changed it. I also would recognise what you said there, that with the community that you have here, I would expect that, you know, based on the arguments that you've made, and, you know, I mean, they're convincing to me, that you go out there and you make those arguments with your constituents as to why you want to retain the Māori wards that this council's chosen to provide for. Yeah, you should hose home in a referendum. And I wish you all the best in that endeavour.
Thank you very much. And I'd just also like to add that most councils want to have a balance of rural and urban, but we don't challenge the rural candidates in the same way. So that doesn't seem to be quite the same level of democracy where Māori wards have been targeted. Yeah.
Well, we could continue this discussion, this debate quite a lot. I remember how long it went on for in the House when the previous Labour Minister of Local Government put it through. I think it went on all night. Yeah.
Appreciate being able to share that. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Councillor Wiles.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, gentlemen, for taking time out to come along and talk to us today. My question relates around the coalition government and the funding that's been withdrawn or reprioritised with around Kaingaroa, the social housing. We have so many vacant lots around the Whakatane urban that now are pending development, and of course we are always trying to grow our ratepayer base. Can you give us any indications of what's going to be happening in that space?
So can I just clarify, are they vacant lots that Kaingaroa had purchased to develop?
Correct. And then with the change of government, the funding has been withdrawn or dried up.
Okay.
And we're now sitting on these vacant lots.
Yeah. I mean, it's a real problem. And I think there's quite a few problems there. Firstly, Kaingaroa, like other parts of the previous government's agencies, had overcommitted and couldn't possibly deliver what they'd committed to. We saw the same thing in education with all the promises for the schools we're going to get built and all the upgrades. It's just nobody who's been involved in project management and construction management would look at that program and say that's achievable. So Kaingaroa had also were going broke very fast. Their debt levels are getting up to $29 billion. They had a Bloomberg terminal in their office. Like every time they're like, oh, geez, we're going to need a bit more capital for this thing that we've just promised to do, and they just go and hit the Bloomberg terminal and borrow some more money. I mean, what is this? You know, so we've had to stop that. And what it has meant is going to be a recalibration in where Kaingaroa are going to do their developments. I think also, it's been some really shocking examples of them overpaying for private land and just paying really over the odds. And forcing private developers, out of those opportunities. So I think what we could expect to see is a rationalisation in Kaingaroa's portfolio of land, and hopefully more opportunities being afforded to the private sector to undertake that development. But that sits with Minister Bishop, and I know that he's got some plans that he's considering, and no doubt he'll be sharing that as soon as he can, because we recognise it's a real impediment to development, particularly in provincial areas like Whakatane. Yeah.
Councillor Tanjos, and then we'll go to Councillor Rangiaho online. Thank you, Councillor.
Thank you, Mr Chair. Like others, just want to echo welcome to whakatane, and thanks very much for coming along to answer questions. You know, local government is constantly facing an onslaught of reform and change, and it costs us huge amounts of money we have to invest staff to understand reforms that are coming our way, often have to change how we work, and from government to government it changes and changes. So having the chance to speak to you and ask you some questions face to face is quite helpful for us to understand, but also I want to impress on you the hugely resource intensity of the reforms that constantly come our way and the new obligations that are put on us all the time. There's been some good discussions of the development, infrastructure development funds and stuff, and so that's been really helpful, so thank you for that. I want to ask around some of the RMA reforms, and particularly I'm interested in the reduced scope of matters that can be considered. You mentioned trade competition. That's already something that can't be considered in a consent, but there are other things that concern me if they are taken out of the scope. So heritage issues, cultural issues and things like that. And my worry is, and I agree that the RMA needs reform, we need to make the processes more efficient, but one of my concerns is that what we are potentially seeing is the ability of local communities to determine what's important for us and being restricted to essentially what the central government ideology is, that's what's important, and it's removing local decision making.
So, all right, understand, and certainly want to acknowledge that central government imposed mandates on local government that introduce cost and churn and, you know, force you to do plan changes about things you think, do we really need to do this? You know, I mean, I can only imagine the conversation around this table when you were forced to implement the National Policy Statement for Highly Productive Land, which has, you know, led to all the problems that some of us forecast. So let's think about what we want to achieve with the new system. The RMA requires planners and decision makers to manage effects down to a less than minor level. And so, you know, my speaking voice here amplified is well over 45 dBA noise level. You know, this is the limit for construction noise after 10 PM in Auckland. How on earth are you supposed to fix a pothole if you can't make any more noise than one worker speaking to another? It's crazy. So that's because the RMA requires us to manage things down to effects that are less than minor. So we need to lift up the materiality of what we consider to be effects. We need to actually accept if we're all going to live together, sometimes there'll be things that you hear or see or which, you know, like might be a bit annoying, but that's all part of living together in a community, and so we can get stuff built, get stuff done. I think it's really important to acknowledge that that there is a requirement under the RMA for cultural impacts to be identified and to be avoided, remedied, mitigated. And also for councils to show on plans where there are sites of significance to Māori, which, you know, could be cultural sites, could be a park, could be a battle site, could be an Murupara, or some other wahitapu that, you know, that planners and decision makers need to know about. And private property owners too. I think it's really important, again, we focus on significance. Because often if you're standing at the side of the road looking at something, you know, it can look quite significant. But you get in a plane and you look at it from 10,000 feet or 30,000 feet, maybe there's a whole lot of those things. And maybe the one that you thought was significant that you were looking at before, when you step back and look at it from a district or region-wide level, you actually, oh, there's quite a few of those. So, you know, if we're going to have an impact on what might be seen as a cultural site, is it something that we're going to apply a more reasonable significance test to? Now, these are all policy decisions yet to be taken, but those are the matters that I'm thinking about. You know, how do we measure significance in a way that recognises what is truly significant and needs to be, and where effects need to be managed? How do we take account of materiality? You know, is this effect really that material? Is it something we need to be regulating and be consenting for, having consent conditions for? Or is it something that the community can say, you know, on balance, we're happy that the things that are really important are protected and we can get on with building and developing the things that we need. And, you know, when it comes to heritage, you might say, actually, there's some really good examples of buildings of different eras in Whakatane, which is one of the reasons I really like coming here. And you might want to see some of those things protected. But, we've got other councils around New Zealand, which Hamilton I'll single out, where they've painted, thousands of what essentially are homes of various quality that might once have been a railway cottage, but have had 3 additions done to them, and all of a sudden thousands of them, including Kaingaroa assets, painted a special character. You can't run a city and you can't develop a city when you've got people who, frankly, should know better, painting their values over other people's private property. So we've got to find a balance here, and Bishop and I are dead keen to find that balance.
Supplementary, I totally agree that materiality and significance are important, but aren't you just removing entire like heritage, aren't you just removing that entirely?
That's not what we're doing.
Okay, thank you.
What we've said is we intend to remove the type of onerous impositions on private property that are costless. In other words, if you have people painting special character overlays, for example, over entire suburbs, that's at no cost to the person holding the felt tip. So, we need to make it clear that if that's really, really important to protect and it's somebody's private property, there's going to have to be some trade-offs. That's why we're also looking at a potential compensation regime where these takings, regulatory takings, cross a threshold. There'll be a lot more to discuss once we have taken those policy decisions. I'd be more than happy to share more.
Thank you. Now, Councillor Rangiaho, and then perhaps our Chief Executive might have a question. So, Councillor Rangiaho.
You can just check on time.
Tēnā koe, tēnei te mihi atu kia kuhua mahi tukuna tiki wa rātou pātai kia koe. So I am acknowledging my fellow councillors and the great questions that they have asked you. What I'm going to... There's an expression that you had used, the devil is in the detail. So you have responded to the questions. I will wait for the devil in its details and can only suggest that you have a safe journey home.
Kia ora. Thank you very much. Appreciate your patience.
Stephen, have you got a question?
Kia ora, thank you very much, Chair, and nō mai haere mai ki te whakatane. To our guests, no, I actually don't have any questions. I've just really been enjoying listening to the discussion and the other questions around the table. I didn't have anything further to ask. It's been a really interesting conversation, some thought-provoking stuff. So I do appreciate it, and thank you very much for asking, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. So I have a question. I won't be very long because we're inviting you to lunch. So the question is, and I'm not sure where it fits really, but we're always the last man standing in some of these disputes and that. Is there a view or a thought around changing that? Because quite often it's got nothing to do with us, but we end up in the firing line.
Thank you, Councillor Fuller. Are you talking about resource management disputes or building disputes or disputes generally?
Generally, really, but it does end up in both arenas, really, but especially if there's a leaky building, for example, in here.
Yeah.
We get held up for inspecting it and nailed to the wall. So, but just generally.
Yeah, just that recently, your master asked us for help in the education sector. So, David Seymour.
Yes.
He sent a letter out to all councils asking for help in the area
to dob in the waggers.
Yeah, that's right.
Okay, so
that's just
and
an example.
Of course you would. So look, in the resource management reform, we want to make it clear that councils are going to have the responsibility, the obligation to plan and zone for future development, and that people who believe that that their property rights include never having to look at something getting built or never having to see a piece of infrastructure, look, we're going to have to accept that we're going to build the stuff, and the new system is going to allow for that. We think that by making that clear at a national level, it'll take a lot of pressure off councils who are often forced to, get involved in these disputes. When I talked to the lines company in Auckland that has all the green transformer boxes around there, I think they've got tens of thousands of these things around Auckland. They said, we want to upgrade these things to be more like a storage device, like a bigger, better transformer. We'd have to get a resource consent for every single one. And imagine litigating all the suburbs of Auckland about just upgrading, to a slightly bigger box. So we need to make it really clear in the new system. There's going to be stuff that councils aren't going to be forced to be the adjudicator on. Also want to provide that outlet through the planning tribunal. And then we think about the wider issue of the Building Act and responsibilities that councils have. So I know that Minister Chris Penk is doing some work on essentially transferring more responsibility to licensed building practitioners. And I expect that over the next 18 months you'll see improvements in that direction. Of course, we could look to other jurisdictions like Australia where they require builders and constructors to have to provide warranties and to have insurance to cover those warranties, so that councils are not essentially left in that last man standing position, that there's a private insurer or somebody who has a warranty they can go and call them. And of course, if you get your roof done, you're going to get a 10-year warranty if you buy, if that's the minimum, or you might choose to pay for the 15 or the 25-year warranty on the roof product. Again, if you're buying something off the shelf from your local electronics store, they're going to offer you, do you want the 2-year warranty or do you want the 5-year warranty? I mean, why on earth this doesn't apply in the building and construction sector, I don't know. And something also to take into account is that engineers, for example, already have a code of ethics. They're registered, they have public liability and professional indemnity insurance, and when they're providing producer statements for things, why on earth, I'm asking this question, I don't have an answer for it, but I expect this is one of the things we're going to have to deal with. Why on earth should councils then be taking on the responsibility of what got built when you've got somebody with all of the insurances stacked up and their professional reputation on the line, providing a producer statement? I mean, none of these things make sense. We need to regulate the effects where it's best to regulate them and let the private sector manage risks that they're best placed to manage. So, look, great question, Councillor Fuller, and I don't expect we'll be able to resolve it this term of government, but it's something that Cameron Luxton as an LBP and I will get to spend a few more hours in the car this afternoon. I'm sure we'll have it sorted by the time we get to our next meeting.
I think, if I may, where we get trapped is we issue the consent and then we do the inspections. And it's not the first owner, it's probably several later.
Yes.
And my house is falling down, but sometimes they buy that knowing that, but the council's going to pay me to fix it, and I just find that frustrating.
Yep, likewise. So, I mean, we can't let that continue. We're not building enough houses faster, and we can't have that continually sheeted home to council and under the joint and several liability regime. So, watch this space. I'm sorry I can't share any more with you right now.
Thank you. So, we'll conclude the meeting with a closing karakia by Councillor O'Brien, and then invite you to join us in the retiring room for some lunch. And I appreciate your time again and your question and the answers you've given us. Actually, it's not an easy subject, and it's shifting goalposts, but we'll get there.
Thank you, Councillor Fuller, and thank you all for your great questions, probing questions, and for sharing your insights as well. I've really welcomed the opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor O'Brien.
Aotira maki, taku whakakapi ngō tēnei o tātou i tuku mehea no kia kōrua i kua tā mai a tinana mai kōrua mai a mātou i tēnei rai. Moha ana tēnei he pukumahi anō hoki kōrua. O tira tēnā kōrua, so thank you gentlemen again for coming. Understand how busy you are and how far you've travelled, so we really do appreciate that. So thank you. So maki whakakapi wa tātou i. Kia tau ngā manakitanga te mangaro i runga i tēnā o mātou. Kia mahe ai te ua maki hiki, toi te kupu, toi te mana, kia toi ngā tikanga koe ia te whakairia, he whakawātea. Hau me ui e, taiki, kia ora tātou.
Thank you.